Welcome to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How we consume it and how it informs our everyday culture.
I'm Christian Sager, a writer and a designer.
And I'm Charlie Bennett, a librarian and a radio raconteur.
Each episode is us trying to understand the entertainment world that we all live in.
Just a little bit better. Today's episode is about the 3 books by legendary science fiction author Philip K. Dick that make the unofficial VALIS Trilogy. Published between 1978 and 1982, these books use psychedelic imagery, religious history, and psychological inquiry to create a portrait of American culture in the late 70s and early 80s. We try to unpack them against the backdrop of our contemporary situation to gain a little clarity on our middle age and our growing paranoia.
You can find show notes for this episode on Patreon at patreon.com/supercontext, or you can write us an email at supercontextpodcast@gmail.com. What do you think about the Gnostic Gospels? Do they have anything to do with older white men trying to discover the secret history of the universe?
Is that us? So, Chris, not all the books that we have done have been big books, but we landed on this kind of, at the beginning of the year, we'll do a big book in the past, the last few years of Super Context's first run. And we're clearly not doing that again because it's December. It's not January. But the big books we did were Goldfinch, Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Le Guin, and Gravity's Rainbow, along with, at other times, reading Infinite Jest. And we did Pale Fire. That's not exactly a big book, but that kind of fits. And I remember you said, hey, let's read VALIS. Let's do VALIS for an episode. And I was like, cool. And then you said it's part of a trilogy. I was like, let's do the trilogy. Let's do a big book. And I remember your eyes went up and you kind of went, when I said that. But I persisted. And so we ended up doing it. We did this absolutely bug shit bonkers trilogy by Philip K. Dick.
I think if I had rolled my eyes, it was probably because I wasn't sure how you were gonna take VALIS.
Roll your eyes; they just went up. It was shock. It was trepidation. Yeah. It was, do you know how much is in that? Is what it looked like.
Yeah, but I had already planned myself to read all 3 of these books this year. I bought myself the American Library edition that is just called VALIS and Later Works, I think. And it's a weird collection because it is the collection that has all 3 of the VALIS books in it. But then instead of Radio Free Albemuth, it is A Maze of Death. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe there's some kind of publication issue, and that's why they couldn't include Radio Free Albemuth. But it doesn't seem like the right 4 books that are gathered together, but I was able to read the 3 that we needed to for this episode.
Well, it's in your character, Chris, to not do what the curation or the gatekeepers suggest to you. So that was like a test of you. Can you disregard Maze of Death?
And so far I've succeeded. I have not read it yet. But I do want to talk a little bit at the top about why I decided to read all of these. I had read VALIS before in my early 20s, and I really enjoyed it. But I don't think I fully understood it at that time.
There's no way you could have.
Yeah, I don't think I fully understand it now, but I didn't grasp the project as much back then. But there's a reason why I came back to it. My father, as I have mentioned before on the show, believes that the world is going to end relatively soon.
Which record is that on?
It's a Rush album, right? The reason I say that is because in 2012, that was the first time that he was convinced that the world was going to end. And he did a little tour of the world to say goodbye to planet Earth. And then nothing happened. And my understanding is this is all from my sister, because my father and I don't speak directly anymore, that he spends a lot of time on like internet message boards talking about quote unquote theology. And this has led to the fact that my father published a book 2 years ago that is his analysis of the book of Revelation, explaining why the world is going to end pretty soon. And it's a line reading of the book of Revelation and his interpretation of it. It is by no means academic in any any measured or empirical sense, and it is wild to read, especially from somebody you were raised by. But I continually think about this book, and as you know, I talk about it a lot because I'm trying to understand what it is about old men trying to prove that they've figured everything out. And because it's not just my dad, like I've seen this with a number of men my father's age. I'm sure you have too. My uncle does a little bit of this too. I don't know if I've mentioned that to you before. He doesn't have his own book yet, but he also is like, considers himself a religious scholar. And he has this like big ledger of graph paper on his desk. And he goes and he sits and he writes in tiny letters his thoughts about religious epiphanies and um, the history of how the Bible was written and what it all means. And presumably he has like shelves of these ledgers, like Kevin Spacey in Seven. You know, between the two of them, I'm kind of like, what is going on here?
Well, I have been saying I feel like we haven't been doing enough Chris psychoanalysis on the show. So this is good. How old is your dad?
My dad is 68.
So the funny thing is that I'm much closer to Philip K. Dick's age when he wrote this book than your dad is,
Mhm.
mostly because Dick died at 54.
Dick is the same generation
Yes. Yeah.
as my father and my uncle.
And one might even say he was advanced or sped up in his
Yeah,
development.
and we'll get into that in the notes, but I think yes, he hit fast forward on life.
The last time we did an episode that had anything to do with Philip K. Dick, if it was a mini-sode or an episode, I can't remember exactly. But I referred to Philip K. Dick as a speed freak. And someone got all up my ass in the comments about that.
Did they? I don't remember this, but
Yeah.
okay.
Basically saying, what an easy dismissal and how inappropriate. And I felt bad about that until
Yeah.
I read a biography of Philip K. Dick. And then I was like, no, I'm right. That's what he was. And he
Hmm.
knew it. And it is an essential part of who he is and the art that he made, that he had this kind of drug fueled mental existence and probably drug fueled physical deterioration, right? From he died of
Hmm.
strokes at I'm saying 54 because I think that's what the math is. I hope that I'm not off by, being close to a birthday, but he yeah, he ravaged himself. And for a long time I thought that, the end of his life, the work at the end of his life was a mess. And I think I just assumed that.
Hmm.
I had no idea that the work at the end of his life was actually crystalline and perfect.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you were unfamiliar with this stuff. I think your experience with him was like hard sci-fi Philip K. Dick, like Minority Report and Blade Runner Philip K.
I
Dick.
mean, I think my experience with him was mostly like vibes,
The
and
movie vibes with
yeah, the
Cyndi
movie
Lauper
vibes
and Jeff
exactly. Yeah,
Goldblum.
no, just like a sense of him from popular culture and um, reading "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" and saying this is nothing like Blade Runner and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I want to unpack a little bit more of this men in their theories of everything because I am now caught in that trap. And
Oh
I,
yeah.
and so yeah, so a little bit of it is me looking at myself now because you know this, but so I started reading Valis again at the beginning of the year, and as I was reading Valis, I was like, oh yeah, there's like some stuff about Kabbalah and Gnosticism in here. I remember this. And at the same time, I bought Alan Moore and Steve Moore's The Moon and Serpent bumper book of magic. at the beginning of the year, and I remember
Right.
sending you a photo of it and being like, "I'm a
Yeah.
wizard now."
Yeah. And you
Um,
are. You are. Everyone's a
I
wizard,
am.
just waiting to happen.
And we've talked about Alan Moore and Magic with a K on the show before. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but I love this book,
Yeah.
and it's everything that I wanted from Alan Moore about magic. And there's stuff in there that's really fascinating to me that I have been utterly dismissive of previously in my life. And the two things are Kabbalah and tarot in particular, where I'm like, oh, there's something here. And
Can I just laugh at you for one moment and get it out of my
yeah,
system?
no, go for it.
Really? Is that what's going on with you
You're
now?
no, you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna get into tarot too.
I'm older than
Um,
you. I dodged tarot. It's more like um, gratitude journaling and cognitive behavior therapy. That's
no,
my
those are
magic.
gateway drugs to tarot, let me tell you. The other
Oh
thing
my
that has
God, dude, can I tell you something?
go for it.
I have a therapist. 2 times ago, when I went in there, the first thing she said to me was, I have to tell you about this experience, and I don't know what you're going to think of it, but I thought of you and you need to know. I'm like, okay, fucking tell me. She communed with her dead mother and father through a medium in a seance online.
Okay, so it's not just men.
It's not just men, and it's not just middle age. I I had a real
Why did she think of you?
unresolved grief issues.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So basically, she might as well have said, "Hey, I know you're going through the same thing I'm going through, and I went on a peyote trip, and now I'm all cleaned out. Maybe you want to do that." That was the form of it. But she
Mm,
said it was a séance, and she talked to her dead parents through a medium, and so I ended up asking her a lot of questions that all boiled down to: is this real? Or is this the experience you had that had the proper effect upon you?
hmm
Because I'm
hmm
totally cool with either one, but I really need to know so I can proceed with full knowledge. And I don't
hmm
know that we got to the answer. And so there was a little bit of magic with a K
hmm
in my second to last therapy appointment. I'm still going back. I didn't dismiss her,
Ask her
but
to read your tarot.
no, no, I don't think so. I might get thrown out.
Well,
Uh,
let me continue with my tarot thing
okay.
though, because I think for me this felt uncanny, and maybe it's because I've been through trauma relatively recently, and it made sense in a way that maybe it wouldn't make sense to other people. So I'm reading Valis, and there's a lot of Kabbalah talk in there. I'm reading Alan Moore and Steve Moore, and there's a whole huge chapter on Kabbalah, unpacking all the various Sephiroth and what they mean and how they connect and everything. And then there's this role playing game that I have been reading the manuals for. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's called Cult Divinity Lost. And it's very similar to the Invisibles, I guess, in terms of like plot. But there is a whole breakdown in there of Kabbalah and how each one of the Kabbalah Sephiroth is actually the like a symbol of some kind of control over humanity. They call them archons in it. And I'm reading through this and I'm like, whoa, this is all it's all coming together, man.
Can you sum up Kabbalah at the level of like, if we
Oof.
had to sum up tarot, we would say it's uh, placing cards and using that to formulate a kind of reading of a person. That level of simplicity. Can you do Kabbalah that way too?
Well, they're connected because at least in some practices, Kabbalah and tarot are the same set of symbols on top of each other. So you can use tarot to symbolize Kabbalah as well. So it's again like my interpretation of it is it's a set of symbols that is sort of describing the experience of of existing in the universe
Uh-huh.
from your base level of like grounded humanity all the way up to transcendence.
Okay.
And that's the tree of life. Each of the steps along the way are Sephiroth. And I think I think of it as a set of symbols that is useful for understanding the world. And I think tarot is the same way. I don't think either of them are magic. I don't think like you can divine the future with either of them, right? But I am fascinated about how different cultures over centuries of time use these same symbols and they layer on top of one another. And then we get to Philip K. Dick. Dick unpacks centuries worth of religious study in these books. Kabbalah is just one of the things that he unpacks, but he does, I think, a fairly interesting job of finding parallels between all of them and tries to make meaning out of it and create his own cosmology, I guess. Does that make
Yeah, I
sense?
mean, it makes sense to me as a description. I don't know that it would at all help people understand what the book is.
Yeah.
Um, Not to argue with you, but to try and give some more context to what we're talking about. My first thought is, oh God, he doesn't unpack anything. He actually problematizes. In my mind, it's almost like by connecting more than has been connected, or connecting these religious and occult almost things
Yeah.
in through a very personal lens, he crafts a different reality than the one we live in. And in fact, it connected a lot with our discussions of why horror, in the sense that to read these books, Valis, The Divine Invasion, and The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, is to be given an opportunity to imagine a variety of reality beyond the world, and to actually create a kind of magical, comma, mystical, or spiritual depth to existence that might not be there before you read them.
Okay. I think I'm on the same page as you. And I think when we dive through the notes with the audience, I think we'll probably land in the same place as you. And I agree. I don't feel like after finishing these books that I understand anything any better. I am just kind of going through this project this year where I'm like,
Yeah.
this is kind of fun for me to look at these things. I like to think that I'm not like my dad or my uncle in that like I'm obsessively trying to find out what the secret of the universe is, but
Mhm.
I am just generally interested in uh, these ideas about humanity because I feel like there has to be some truth in them. There has to be some wisdom in there. It can't all be crackpottery.
Ah, and you mean that legitimately? You're like, there must be
Yeah.
something here. Is
Yeah.
that
I think if there's hundreds of years of practice in these things, and then they're tied up in, everything from a comic book writer to one of the most lauded science fiction writers of the century, and then this like silly horror role-playing game from
Mhm.
Sweden, there's some kind of thread between them, even though I understand your instinct to just be dismissive of anything that is like kind of borderline supernatural.
I'm more materialist than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, I have one last question, which is a yes or no question before we start the bulk of the episode.
Yeah.
Is this different than when you were younger? Has there been a transformation in your sense of there being something, because these ideas have been around? Your sense of there being a truth there, is that new, or has that kind of been happening all along?
I think it's been happening all along. I think when I was first reading this stuff, I was maybe hoping to find something like that, but I didn't have the world experience to understand. I'm not talking about the other stuff here. I'm just talking about the Dick books.
Okay.
I didn't have the world experience to understand his experience and what he was trying to do with these stories. Um, there's things in here that I feel like you can only identify with if you're a middle-aged person. And Does that make sense?
That seems like the most true thing either one of us has said so far.
Yeah. Whereas like in my early 20s, I was like, oh, this guy's wild. Like he's this crazy person who wrote this insane story.
Yeah.
But I didn't really understand why.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
Okay. So you've already named the books, but let's unpack what we mean when we say VALIS Trilogy, because it is not actually three books. We read three books. We did not read five books. But there are other texts that are sort of part of this universe of books.
Yeah.
So it's a set of science fiction or philosophical novels by Philip K. Dick. We've mentioned Valis, The Divine Invasion, and The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. However, my understanding is that The Transmigration of Timothy Archer was not considered by Dick himself to be part of the trilogy.
It's
He,
something he says that he kind of accepts, even though that's not what his intention was.
yeah, he was working on a book when he died called The Owl in Daylight that was meant to be the third book that is unfinished. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. And then, parallel to all of this, he had this journal that he called the exegesis that he was using to unpack his, I guess, preternatural experiences, or to your point, like the addled mind of a speed freak. Um, and that has since been published as well as a text. And so there's a lot of people who have gone through that line by line and sort of compared it with Valis and these other books to sort of try to see what came from his real life and what was made up.
And an exegesis is an actual thing. It is, I'm going to read from a random Google search. Exegesis is a critical explanation or interpretation of a text. Traditionally, this term is applied to interpreting biblical works. Your dad's book is,
Mm,
I believe, exegesis is the verb, maybe, or now it is a exegesis or it is
mm,
exegesis. Um, when there's a text that offers up close reading possibilities
hmm.
and allows one to expand idea after idea after idea, it seems ripe for exegesis. And his was inspired by some truly extraordinary experiences that he related,
Hmm.
that may or may not be real. It cannot be verified. It seems unreal, but also there's a lot more in the world than any of us know.
Yeah, I do want to put a stake in this early on. It's something that I've said to you before. I've said it on other podcasts. I don't believe that these things happened to Philip K. Dick, but I believe that he believes they happened to him. And so, therefore, it is as important to
Yeah.
understanding his project as if it were real. Um, I feel the same way about alien abduction stories. Like nine times out of
Oh,
10, I'm
interesting.
like, that's not a thing that happened, but I still feel empathy for the people who have
Yeah.
experienced it because to them it's real.
I want to split a hair.
Hmm.
I also believe what you just said. However, I believe that Philip K. Dick really did have these experiences. Not just that he believes it, but I really
Hmm.
think he had these experiences and he's made the story around them. Like I think that
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because I've done psychedelic drugs, nowhere near as many as most people who say I've done a lot of drugs, but I've done
Hmm.
them. I've had that experience. I have felt that kind of altered, fractured, whatever you want to call it, perception. And I have been in uh, very light. This is not a joke, but very light drug-induced psychosis,
Hmm.
and that's pharmaceuticals, not recreational drugs. So I totally believe that he had, and we're going to get into it. I know we're talking about a thing that we haven't explained yet, but I believe that he had those experiences, but I also believe very strongly that you can have those experiences all based on your brain chemistry without any outside stimuli.
Yes, I'm on board with you there too. Um, okay. Let's dig in a little deeper. So there is an interview that we're going to reference repeatedly in here because it is the last interview that Dick ever gave, and it is pretty comprehensive
Yeah,
in terms of him talking about this whole project and these
I
three books
love this
together.
interview, and I cannot begin to fathom what the tone of each sentence was when he spoke it aloud. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So in this interview, he has one paragraph where he pretty much like sets out one sentence at a time what these books are. He says, I would call Valis a picaresque novel, experimental science fiction. The Divine Invasion has a very conventional structure for science fiction. It is almost science fantasy. There's no experimental devices of any kind. Timothy Archer is in no way science fiction. It starts out the day John Lennon is shot, and then it goes into flashbacks. And then he closes this out by saying, "But the three do form a trilogy, constellating around a basic theme." So here we go. He does refer to them as a trilogy, even
Yeah.
though in other spaces he also says Timothy Archer is not part of that trilogy.
Yeah. The line, they do form a trilogy. Well, excuse me. And yet the three do form a trilogy really does feel like someone relenting to outside forces. You
Yeah,
know?
maybe that's it. Yeah, yeah, that people were already. I mean, although Timothy Archer, I think, had only been out for maybe a year when he did this interview, so I don't know necessarily that there was, and there was no internet, right? So, like, who was, how was he getting in touch with the fan hive mind, telling him, no, 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 we think that this is a trilogy.
Well, don't you think people who were really into these books would be the kind of person who would write a really extensive letter to Philip K. Dick?
Yes, you're right, and I had forgotten about that. That you used to be able to do that. Yeah, and that he was probably the kind of guy who was receptive to that and wouldn't like change his address or whatever. Yeah.
All right, let's
Um.
do first things fucking last. Here
Yeah.
is who Philip K. Dick is. He is a now, probably then, but a now celebrated American writer who was once considered genre and science fiction and less important than he should have been. Who is now being treated critically as an important American writer. He
Hmm.
lived from 1928 to 1982. That's where I got that 54 from.
Okay. So he's a couple years older than my father and uncle. He's not
A couple.
necessarily the same generation.
He is known today for film adaptations of his work mostly. And that means he's popularly known as
Yeah.
the guy who wrote the books that became Blade Runner, Minority Report, although I think that was a story, Total Recall, and The Man in the High Castle. And also Screamers, of course.
Yeah.
Uh, Prior to his 1974 experience that led to writing the three books we're talking about today, he experienced a ton of traumatic events in his life. I mean, like the guy got hit by the world over and over and over again, sometimes because of what he did, and sometimes just because the world beat him up. He had a twin sister who died 6 weeks after they were born. He's now buried next to her. His parents were divorced, and he was pulled from his dad by his mom. He himself had multiple divorces, five. He had three children amongst those marriages. He has admitted to being physically violent in at least one marriage, although also I think he says that one of his wives beat him up too.
I think that was the same one that was described.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
there
There
was
was
a violent
mutual
relationship.
violence, I
Yeah,
guess. Yeah. Yeah.
he did a lot of drugs, and a lot of them were dangerous drugs, not just for fun. Like he really kind of beat himself up with substance abuse, and he tried to kill himself. Literally drove off the road to kill himself. Failed, obviously. And was it a separate event? Was the drug overdose?
I believe so. I think there may have been. even more suicide attempts outside of those two as well. I'm gonna take the reins on this next section just because I wrote it in a kind of shorthand.
Yeah,
So I mentioned that I got this American Library Edition collection. You know those. They're
I
like these
do. I do.
hardcover kind of nice collections. And in the back of it, they do a chronology of his life. And it is thoroughly researched. And it's like every year, and there's just a list of events.
And did it just seem horrible?
I mean, it didn't seem horrible because he lived kind of an awesome life outside of all of the trauma too, you know. I mean, he had great success. He got to interact with and communicate with like the greatest science fiction writing minds of his time. He was respected by his peers. But I don't know necessarily that he had the tools for coping with the life around him. So, in addition to the things Charlie just read, here's some things. These are things that just happened in the 70s. And the reason why I'm listing these is because these are things that happened leading up to the writing of Valis,
Yeah.
leading up to the event that we're going to talk about that is the quote unquote 1974 incident, or I think he calls it, it's like 2374 or
It's
something
two
like
three
that.
seventy four for February 3rd, 74.
Yeah. So this is the stuff that was going on in his life. And I think listener, this may give you an understanding of one, why Charlie feels justified in calling him a speed freak, and two, I think we both feel justified in saying like what started this project came from a place of trauma and substance
Yeah.
abuse. In the 70s, he started off with one divorce, lots of drug use. He had a lot of transient people passing through his home. And by that, I mean, like, he just had a constant influx of people coming in and staying and leaving. And this is described in some of his interviews and some of his biographies. It wasn't stable.
Yeah.
He was committed by one of his friends to a psychiatric ward at Stanford University Hospital. Then he was transferred from there to another hospital. Then his home was broken into, and he had various theories about who broke into his home. Well, in one of them, he accuses the Black Panthers of doing it. One of them, it's the FBI. And then he says, I don't know, maybe it was me. Maybe
Right.
I broke in and smashed everything up. I don't know. This is not a reason to go crazy, but he became very good friends with Ursula K. Le Guin, who we've done an episode on before. He corresponded with her and with several popular science fiction writers of the time, including people like Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, what's his name, Harlan Ellison. Like all of these people were in communication with him. He attempts suicide. He enters rehab. He gets married again to an 18-year-old when I think he's probably in his 40s. Um, he is then hospitalized for high blood pressure and has what they think was a minor stroke. While he's married to the 18-year-old, he falls in love with a woman who's in training to be an Episcopal priest. He asks her to marry him. She rejects him. Then he separates and divorces from the 18-year-old. He tries to kill himself again almost immediately after. Then he moves in with the woman who's the priest trainee, but it's platonic. Their relationship is the basis of the characters in The Divine Invasion, which we'll talk about shortly. And then after that situation, checks into the mental ward again. And then finally, right before the 80s kick in, his mother dies. So he's got this just like torrent of trauma.
Yeah. A completely unstable life. There, you have a line here. You read the biography by Laurent Casey and Mauro Marchesi, and you found that to kind of reveal Dick as emotionally unregulated, a philanderer, and a difficult person to be around, for his friends and family.
Yeah.
It's obvious that he had charm and smarts, and that he was, he could connect to people, but that was not the only way he could be. And then he died from multiple strokes in 1982. We talked about high blood pressure, we talked about drug use, like he beat up his body, and who knows what else happened to him.
Hmm.
Just stress and drugs and uh and living full tilt.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Um, So, okay, we've given you sort of the 10,000 foot overview of his life. We haven't talked about his works really. Let's dive into the production of these books and what led to them. So we've referred to it already, 2374. What is that? We've been hinting at it. How long have we been recording now? For like 15, 20 minutes, and we're now getting to it.
Might be a little longer than
Yeah. Okay.
that.
Um, in 1974, he experienced a series of visions and other phenomena that led him to explore the quote philosophical implications of this experience.
And that is
Um,
explicitly what you and I were talking about when we said
yeah,
we don't believe the reality that he describes, but it seems almost assured that he had these literal sense experiences.
yeah, yeah. I've included a couple different iterations of this because every time he told the story, it was a little bit different. And
Well, it
I
would have
think,
to be.
yeah. Um, but let's start with the Katie Dancy Downs. That's a fun name to say. Uh, she writes about it for Salon. And she says, Philip K. Dick claimed on numerous occasions that a disembodied voice would pop up now and again and guide him through crucial moments in his life. He called this Ruah, meaning the Spirit of God, and it first began speaking to him in high school when he was stuck, on a physics exam, which he says he aced with the voice's help. So this is even before the 74 incident. The voice appeared and reappeared for short intervals afterward and only offered brief bits of advice before disappearing again. During one such talk, which came complete with a blinding pink light, and we'll get to that in a second, uh, Philip K. Dick claimed that the voice alerted him that his son was in danger of dying from an undiagnosed right inguinal hernia. Though Dick's retelling differs from his wife's, I don't know which of the five wives it was, they eventually got the baby to a specialist where he was officially diagnosed with this, and they eventually operated on him and saved his life.
So, what are your feelings about hearing voices as a thing that some people experience and some people don't?
I think that people have different brains. And,
Yeah.
I think now hearing voices is maybe, I don't know if we would categorize that today as neurodiversity, but I think we have different understandings of what schizophrenia actually means now as
Hmm.
a, or maybe just sort of at a higher medical level than I think like maybe we had when Dick was alive,
Yeah.
right? Uh, I know I have a friend who's schizophrenic, and they hate the way that it's depicted
Right.
in media um and yeah, like I think it's possible to maybe have those voices, but also be a functional person and understand where they came from. And in this case, like I'm not diagnosing Philip K. Dick as schizophrenic. I'm just saying like whatever was going on, I don't think it was addressed. And maybe it couldn't even be addressed given the state of the medical community at the time, right? They would have just thrown him in a psych ward, which they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And anecdotally, I, I feel like the voice in the head is a much more common thing than people have admitted maybe in the past, or maybe
Mm,
people admitted it at first in human existence because God was speaking to them. And then
sure.
we started kind of not talking about it so much. And now there's more of a, yeah, I hear voices. It's, a mental illness or it's a disability. I heard a voice once.
Oh yeah?
It scared the shit out of me. And I thought of it as a kind of like loose synapse in my brain. That no
Mm-hmm.
medical training. I'm just like that's how I thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did from that extrapolate what it might be like if you heard those voices all the time.
I also think, again, no medical training, that we as human beings do not come anywhere near to understanding how our brains actually work and how our unconscious interacts with our conscious. And so I think in a situation like this, who knows like how he was able to intuitively understand that his son had this hernia, right? And it needed to be uh, um, diagnosed and treated. I but I think like I don't think it was like a divine voice that told him about this. I think there was some kind of combination of things that alerted him to it. He was clearly like an incredibly smart guy reading these three books. Like
Yeah.
this guy's a genius, but he's also like, unhinged too.
Hmm.
So he's interpreting his calculations, I guess, through like a flawed premise.
Yeah. One such talk, which came complete with a blinding pink light. I mean, I think that he also had enough things happening to go along with whatever might have been going on in his head to
Yeah,
change his attitude towards various things. The pink light becomes a huge part of Valis and the understanding
it's
that
very big. Yeah.
the pink light is in the book the indication of an actual intelligence somewhere else.
Why don't you take the next section, which describes the pink light further?
Okay, this is from Seamus O'Reilly, writing in the Irish Times. In February 1974, while Dick was recovering from a barbiturate he had been given for dental surgery, a young woman came to his door with fresh medication from his pharmacy. He came to believe that her necklace shot him with an intelligent pink beam of light, giving him secret religious knowledge, a certain degree of clairvoyance, and a particularly bad case of time displacement. Dick now intermittently found himself inhabiting the ancient past as Thomas, a first century Christian fleeing persecution by the black prison like contours of hateful Rome. This was the beginning of the exegesis.
Uh-huh.
And this is so carefully laid out in the book Valis that I feel like I totally understand everything in that
Right.
quick description.
Yeah.
It probably is a little disorienting to hear such a summed up version of these things. But he was struck with an epiphany that came with these, sense experiences that were unexplainable. He believed he had new knowledge. In the books, he writes about being able to speak languages that he doesn't know.
Hmm.
That like to sort of embody that sense of clairvoyance. And then the intermittently found himself inhabiting the ancient past. This is like having a transparency over reality where both exist sometimes. And then there's a little bit of fading in and fading out of
Yeah.
the two realities. A very science fictiony idea that came from a very disorienting real experience.
Yeah. I wanna I wanna relook at that description from Seamus O'Reilly for a second, just to stop and think about this a little bit from our perspective now in 2025. He was recovering from a barbiturate he was given for dental surgery. So can you imagine today, like a known drug addict who's been in rehab multiple times and mental clinics multiple times, uh, specifically for substance abuse, goes to the dentist and they're just like, yeah, here's some barbiturates. Um, they probably didn't know, right? But he's not self-disclosing either, despite the fact he's been through multiple recovery programs.
I actually have a quote from um, another graphic novel, not the one you read.
Yeah.
Uh, so Dick said, I had a wisdom tooth extracted. They gave me a tremendous amount of sodium pentothal. I came home and was in great pain. He hadn't given me any pain medication, and my wife called the pharmacy. Can you
Also,
imagine?
no, I can't. And here's the second thing about that that's wild to me. You just call the pharmacy and they come and drop the medication off for you at your front door? I
Dude,
want that again.
Valium and Quaaludes,
Do
right?
you know how
Over the counter.
obnoxious it is going to the pharmacy nowadays? This is the Black Iron Prison, Charlie.
Dude, the
It's
70s were
closing in.
wild in many ways.
But okay, so outside of all that and the laughing and everything, I feel like we are either coming across as really judgmental of him and his lifestyle or genuinely being judgy about it. And I want to try to be a little bit open-minded, even though this is not my lifestyle.
Oh, dude, I can tell you right now, uh, a lot of the seemingly judgy or dismissive aspects come from fear. You know, this is, I think both of us have a fear of collapsing out of our stability, our mental stability, into
Yeah,
something else.
yeah,
And I mean, Dick is Dick is so successful in his career that to hear about this like chaotic life and the vulnerability that he had, it makes me frightened to hear it.
yeah,
And
yeah, I
I
agree.
am I am covering my fear with kind of like, is this is crazy, you know? Gosh, he did all
Yeah,
those drugs. That must be why he lost his mind. Not because sometimes you lose your mind and anyone can can lose it at any time.
well, I also don't think necessarily one thing led to the other, right? I think like they may be concurrent things that
Yeah.
were happening, if that makes sense. But yeah, I just um I do think like it's pretty easy to draw a logical conclusion that like between all the trauma and the substance abuse and the mental illness,
Yeah.
that seems as the most, it's the Occam's razor explanation for Rua and the pink light and Valis, all the stuff, right? Um, we may sound dismissive, but we're also dedicating like 3 hours to sitting down and recording this episode and talking to you about this and reading all of these books, which I think we can both say we found utterly fascinating.
Oh my God, I loved these books. I loved the experience of reading the three of them as a trilogy without demanding that they have continuity.
Yeah.
Um, you know, we didn't get to this really wonderful description that O'Reilly wrote about what the trilogy is like. He said, all of which contributed to Dick's VALIS Trilogy, which fizz and thrum with allusions to Gnosticism, Greek philosophy, Jungian psychology, and 1960s acid rock.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good one sentence description. We're going to give you a 5 sentence description in a little bit, but um, Dick described the 1974 encounter as being with what he referred to as a transcendental rational mind. Um, and here's another quote about this is sort of where the variations come in. This is him talking about the, the pharmacy woman. As I stared at the gleaming fish sign and heard her words, I suddenly experienced what I later learned is called anamnesis, a Greek word meaning literally loss of forgetfulness. I remembered who I was and where I was. In an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, it all came back to me. And not only could I remember it, but I could see it. The girl was a secret Christian, and so was I. We lived in fear of detection by the Romans. We had to communicate with cryptic signs. She had just told me all this, and it was true. He goes on to talk about the Black Prison, hateful Rome. He remembers, I think, meeting Jesus. Yeah. So this is like more of a little deep detail to it, but also this guy's a professional storyteller. And like, as I'm reading this, like the sentence, in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, it all came back to me, right? Like that's storytelling. He's
Did you
using
not just
style.
say we were going to try and not be dismissive of this?
No, I'm not. That's not dismissive. I'm just saying he's um exaggerating to great effect with his
Yeah,
storytelling
he's
capabilities.
dramatizing.
Yes.
And the other thing is this text, this either written or spoken description of the event reads like something from Valis.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like some of these sentences are in there. Certainly, the loss of forgetfulness is explicitly mentioned. The the hallucination or revelation of simultaneous existence in two different time periods as two different
Hmm.
people, that's explicitly part of the book.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, these hallucinations are what led to writing the exegesis and writing Valis for sure, and probably Divine Invasion, Transmigration of Timothy Archer. I mean, I think part of why he says it's not exactly the trilogy is because it has a lot less of this reliance on the world that is posited by
Yeah.
that experience with the pharmacy delivery person.
It's not connected to the cosmology of 2374, but it is similar in the sense that it is a story about seeking enlightenment. It's just more grounded in modern day
Yeah.
religion because it's essentially a biography that he's just punched up that's about a
Yeah.
friend of his.
There's a weird thing here, too. He says that the voice didn't speak to him after he wrote The Divine Invasion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he made it clear too, it speaks in a feminine voice and it tends to express statements regarding the messianic expectation. How do you interpret that?
I interpret that as speaking to the eventual return of the Messiah,
Ah, okay.
the
Okay.
expectation of the Messiah. But also, don't quote me, it was just a member of my family that went to seminary, not me.
Right. Right. I remember you telling me that when we first met, and for years I thought that your dad was a priest
Almost all but
for a
ordination.
long time until I met him. Okay, so there's a little bit more here where before we get into the meat of Valis and Divine Invasion and Timothy Archer, about Dick sort of explaining why he's writing these books and how they're connected to the thing. And he says, I'm reprocessing my own life. I've had a very interesting 10 years starting in 1970 when my wife Nancy left me and went off with a Black Panther, much to my surprise. As a result, I hit bottom. I mean, I just fell into the gutter. I crashed into the streets in shock when this happened.
This is what I mean by I really wonder what the actual tone was that he said these words in.
Oh, yeah, you think there's a little bit of like
I just don't know.
irony?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely some irony. I mean, very
Yeah.
interesting 10 years. But it just, yeah, like how was he saying this? That's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so compelling to me.
He says, I was very bourgeois. I had a wife and a child. I was buying a house. I drove a Buick. I wore a suit and tie. All of a sudden, my wife left me, and I wound up in the street with street people. Uh, I think that is also maybe an exaggeration, but
Well, this is the talk of the transients in and out of his house.
yeah, yeah,
You know, having less to be responsible to means you can be less responsible. And so,
sure,
being
yeah.
out there and scoring drugs, you meet people. And if someone comes to your house to deliver drugs, if it's not from the pharmacy, then maybe they'll come in and hang out.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
in connection to the woman from the pharmacy. Yeah.
yeah.
He was probably used to getting little paper bags full of things brought to his front door.
Now, I
Uh
love this bit
yeah.
that follows that description. He says, after I climbed out of that, which was ultimately a death trip on my part, I thought, well, I've got some interesting firsthand material that I'd like to write about. I will recycle my own life in the terms of a novel. Having done that in A Scanner Darkly, I was faced with what to do next. It took me a long time before I felt that I had what I wanted. I love that so much. It feeds into my desire for novel writing to be a kind of processing and reconciling of your life. That
Mm,
makes the most sense to
hmm.
me as a failed novel writer, is that you are putting your life into a work that makes it more compelling, but it retains its psychological truths. And the more I read about what he was going through and what he was doing at the time that he was building up to writing these books, the more I realized that the books were not nearly as made up as they felt. They were renditions of things that actually happened and how he felt about things that happened.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear in Valis that he is taking real experiences, he inserts them into a conceit of the multiple personalities. And then I think he saw The Man Who Fell to Earth and was like, I'm going to throw
Right.
some of that in too. Um, The divine invasion, despite the fact that it's science fiction, it takes place on another planet. It involves baby messiahs being
Transplanted
born.
consciousnesses.
Yeah. Outside of all of that, like it's very clearly about like a loveless relationship and the sort of consequences of that, right? And then Timothy Archer, we said it already, is just fictionalized biography of a friend of his.
Yeah. And of him too. I mean, that
Yeah,
bit about falling in love with someone who was training to be a priest, trying to marry them
exactly.
and having that fail. I mean,
Yep.
okay, well, let's continue because so he says one of the things we wanted to pull out of that interview, one of the effects of his experience with street people that kind of into the gutter and back out again, he said, I tended to view people as essentially rogues. I don't mean lovable rogues. I mean unscrupulous rogues out to hustle you at any moment for any reason. I found them endlessly fascinating, and I didn't see people of this type adequately represented in fiction. So he's drawing a line back to like Damon Runyon kind of fiction. There was this sort of this guy who'd been writing psychedelic science fiction for a long time.
Hmm.
Suddenly had a kind of Nelson Algren, Damon Runyon realist novel urge. What are people like?
It's interesting that you mentioned that because in a lot of the homework for this episode, there was conversation. I should say first, like, I have not read all of Philip K. Dick's books, but there was conversation about how when he first started in his career, he wrote a lot of realist work. And science fiction was something he got into later, and it sold and paid the bills, so he kept doing it.
Yeah.
And that this period was somewhat of like a reflection of his urge to get back into that to the point that Timothy Archer is grounded in reality. I mean, I don't think there's anything supernatural in it that happens. People talk about things happening to them
Yeah,
that are supernatural that are
exactly.
not believed. Yeah.
All it takes is for you to say, "Oh, the possession by spirits or the poltergeists or things
Yeah.
like that, that
Yeah.
is mental illness on the
Hmm.
part of the people relating." Then it's a completely realistic, maybe not quite bourgeois. I don't know if the characters in Timothy Archer count as bourgeois. Maybe they
Oh,
do.
they're well, I don't know about the narrator, but the other three are upper class for sure.
That might be true, yeah. But like everybody was struggling for money the whole time.
Yeah, so two things I want to unpack here. First of all, I just realized that like in the course of us talking about the plots of those novels a little bit, he himself was judgmental of people who claimed to experience things like he claimed to experience. And then second of all, I want to put a pin in this because it's a little it's rubbing me the wrong way, which is like the term street people. When he first used that, I was like, I don't think he's using it in the way that like my grandmother might have used it, right? Like in that he was referring to somebody who was homeless. I think street people to him was sort of like terminology for like hipsters, right?
Yeah. So my parents lived in California in the late 60s.
Hmm.
And one of the sort of capsule descriptions that they used about California, as opposed to New York, Boston, and DC, where they had lived,
Hmm.
was that in California, the classes were mixed, that the drug dealer lived next to the lawyer, lived next to the mechanic, lived next to the doctor.
Mm. Hmm. I
And I
wonder if
don't
that's still true.
I mean, who fucking knows at this point with
Yeah.
the way that houses and real
I mean, it
estate have
wasn't my
happened.
experience of the West Coast, is why I'm
Right.
wondering.
But I
Yeah.
mean, very explicitly pre oil crash, right?
Yeah.
Late
Yeah.
60s, California was developed in a different way from cities that, were around when the colonies were happening, right?
Hmm.
When the
Hmm.
colonies were happening. That's a historical term,
Yeah. That British colony that was in California.
which was not. That's what my point. Are you fucking kidding me? The cities that existed since the founding of America.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, I wanted to put a pin in that because I could imagine somebody listening and being like, why are they just throwing street people around so casually? Like because I think that's a fairly offensive term today.
I guess so. Yeah, it is. Um, but yeah, that's how he described it. That was his take on it. And this was pre Reagan. Post oil crash, pre
Yeah.
Reagan.
Yeah. Okay. We've set a good amount of this up for you listeners in terms of where Dick was coming from, what was motivating him, why he wrote these books. Let's actually unpack the books. And I want to start with the exegesis, even though neither of us read it. I've seen passages online. He includes passages of it in Valis, so I have a sense of it. But this was published posthumously in 2011. I don't know. I'm curious if this was something he would have wanted to be
Well,
published.
let's be explicit about this. We didn't read this because this is an enormous
It's 8,000 pages
edit,
long.
edited text
Yeah.
of an actual journal that he kept from the experiences that he had that became Valis.
Yeah.
It was found by a friend and sort of hidden away. I think the general sense was his buddies did not want the authorities or his family to see this because then they would say, "Oh, he's crazy, and we now have power of attorney over him."
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it was stashed. It was from 1974 to 1982, written in hand, sometimes 150 pages in a sitting. It consists of 8,000 pages of notes, and the published version is just a small selection of that.
I'm going to tell you something that, as my friend, I'd like you to do the same thing that his friends did for him.
Hide that shit away.
So, so since my divorce, I have been journaling a lot. And that's a thing that's encouraged by mental health professionals, and
Sure is.
I found it very helpful. But I do it in those little composition notebooks that
Yeah.
you get at like the grocery store. I like them. They're not frilly, and I don't feel like it's like a holy artifact that I need to,
Yeah.
treat with reverence. But now I'm starting to accumulate stacks of these things as I'm going on. And I imagine for the rest of my life, I'm going to keep writing in them. And I keep thinking again about seven that like there's going to be some day where I have passed away or I'm in prison for some reason. And somebody comes into my home and just sees these stacks of
Yeah.
journals and are like, Chief, you better get a look at this.
So you're saying whoever of us finds you,
Yeah,
you'd like
please.
us to burn it all?
Or
Philip?
publish it as an 8,000 page book 20
Yeah,
years
no, I
after
won't.
I die.
No, I don't think I'll be doing that.
30 years after I die.
Dick
Uh,
wrote in the exegesis, and this is just a tiny little moment somewhere in the books. My books and stories are intellectual parentheses, conceptual close parentheses mazes. And I am in an intellectual maze and trying to figure out our situation because the situation is a maze leading back to itself.
so I think in that, I'm guessing that he's speaking about, his interpretation of, we'll get into this, of the empire never ended, the Black Iron Prison. But I also think like he's ultimately, when he's talking about the situation that's a maze, I think he's talking about modern day society and capitalism.
Yeah. And also just the variety of structures of meaning, the variety of ways
Mm,
to connect to people, to God, and to all that. I mean, like the maze is clearly Valis, reading
yeah.
that or Divine Invasion or many other of his texts.
All right, here we go.
Yep.
Valis, the big one. I'd
I'm
say this
ready.
is the granddaddy of all these books. It comes out in 1978. For those of you who haven't read it, the title is actually an acronym and it stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. This is Dick's version of God, based on the Gnostic Gospels. The book itself is set in California during the 70s. It's heavily autobiographical. It draws inspiration from his life experiences, but also he spent a ton of time investigating religious experiences and looking into religious history, trying to make sense of what was happening to him.
It explicitly references the exegesis.
Yep.
The
Yep.
narrator of Valis is writing an exegesis.
And there's huge chunks of the exegesis that are
Yep.
just dropped into the middle of the text. Yeah.
And there's no way that we can really parse this effectively in the short time we're going to do.
No.
But I do want to say the book is postmodern as hell
Hmm.
in that the narrator posits himself as a separate subject and also collapses his own subjectivity into multiple other characters within the book.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's important to note here that he wrote this book twice. So he started writing it uh, as what he was calling VALIS System A, and then we'll get into it along the way. But he puts that version aside. I think it had something to do with his publisher, and then he sits down and he writes the version that is published as VALIS in 2 weeks, which is insane to
Yeah, I
me.
mean,
Like,
obviously there's some drug fueled,
yeah,
energy, psychic and physical. VALIS System A is also sometimes called 2374 because it was directly from that experience.
yeah.
And it is super science fictiony as compared to the vaguely realistic nature of VALIS.
I haven't read it. So it was published posthumously as Radio Free Albemuth, which I mentioned earlier in 1982. I'm very curious about it. Like I said at the top, I don't understand why it wasn't included in this collection since it's literally the first version of the book, but whatever. Um, all right. We're gonna try something here that we've never done before.
Shout
Charlie
out
and
to
I
Just King Things.
Yeah, Charlie and I during our 5 year hiatus became fans of this podcast called Just King Things, which is a podcast all about the works of Stephen King. And every episode on that show, they do these 5 sentence summaries of the books. And I thought that it would be useful here since we're trying to cover 3 books in one episode. All right, I'll take this first one. And I wrote all these, but they're Charlie, feel free to jump in because I'm sure I'm missing
Oh
stuff.
no, I'd like to see you dig on these.
Okay. Horselover Fat, a dissociated identity of Philip K. Dick's, is visited by a pink beam of light that tells him hidden facts of the reality of the universe. He and his friends come up with multiple theories as to what's happening to him, one of which is that a recently released film called Valis is channeling the same themes as Fat's visions. Fat and his friends go visit the filmmakers, who are analogs for David Bowie and his wife, and they reveal that their daughter is the reincarnated Messiah sharing Gnostic Christian wisdom with Fat and his friends. Their daughter heals Fat of his dissociated identity and then dies a few days later. I don't know why I'm laughing at that part, other than that it's just
Remember,
wild.
we laugh because we're afraid.
Yeah. Fat then resurges, the personality of Fat, and goes around the globe in search of the daughter's next reincarnation.
That all checks out to me.
Reading it out loud like that, though, like it sounds absolutely batshit. But when you're reading the book, you're like, man, this is great.
Yeah. So, real quick, no more than 2 sentences. Um, my experience of reading this book was to be sucked in by a very compelling narrative voice that, in almost a Nabokovian way, revealed that there were some fissures in the reality of it. So that by the time I got to the heavy science fiction stuff, the David Bowie vast active living intelligence system and the pink light and Jesus and the daughter and all that stuff. By the time I got there, I was like, okay, in for a penny, in for a pound kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I loved the whole thing, and I felt like I had been on an acid trip when I was done.
Have you seen The Man Who Fell to Earth?
No, yes, that's the Nicholas Rogue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have seen it.
The movie's fascinating. And I can only imagine if you were somebody like Philip K. Dick who was existing in that space, but probably wasn't feeling like you had contemporaries, that to see a movie like that was profound. And then on top of that, you're going through all of these
Yeah.
metaphysical experiences. So Dick says about Valis System A, I jettisoned the first version of Valis. It was a very conventional book. That version appears in the finished book as the movie. Okay, so yeah, we didn't mention that. So the way he describes the the movie within Valis is the book Valis System A.
Okay, let's say that again. In the published book Valis,
Yeah,
which is the book he wrote when he discarded Valis System A, contains a description of a film that he and his friends see.
yeah,
That film summarized in the book Valis is the plot of Valis System A.
Which is then published as Radio Free Albemarle.
Yeah, later, much later.
Yeah.
So he says when he jettisoned Valis System A, the conventional book that just wasn't doing what he wanted it to do, it occurred to him to go all the way back to the picaresque novel in which a roguish character moves through the strata of society and comments upon it, and have my characters be picaroons, rogues, and write it in the first person vernacular using a rather loose plot. I feel there's tremendous relevance in the picaresque novel at this time. I see this as a protest form of the novel, a repudiation of the more structured bourgeois novel that has been so popular.
He was fixated on the terms bourgeois and picaresque at that time because he says them about a million times in
Well,
that
also, I
interview.
mean, those are
Yeah.
terms of art in
Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
terms of art in terms. They're terms of art when you're examining literature. And as we
Yeah.
said, he's so smart. He's sucked in so much stuff. You know, the fact that he's
Hmm.
able to write a book like Eye in the Sky, which is this wild, trippy science fiction, laser beams and things, you know, kind of people caught in a laboratory sort of science fiction, and then write this wonderfully constructed stealth science fiction novel that
Mm.
really does read like a straight literary fiction book for a while before it starts to
Hmm.
get loosey goosey. I mean, he was an excellent writer. He had
Yeah.
such technique and skill.
And I don't feel like we're doing it justice here either, listeners. If you have not read this book, like not only is his storytelling impeccable, but then he'll just drop like 2 pages of theology on you out of nowhere that is just like it is dense, but it's also readable and relevant to the story. And it's clearly researched, but also like feels like he's just pulling it off the top of his head because he has it all at his
Yeah.
fingertips.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I want to say this. I don't feel like Valis should ever be adapted into a movie, but I feel like there's a world in which a Paul Thomas Anderson or Coen brothers could make a very kind of Big Lebowski-esque Valis that would work as a film.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, after we've seen Paul Thomas Anderson do those two Pinchon books, it does seem like he's ready for it. You know,
Hmm.
taking some very internal stuff and making it external in a story.
Yeah.
We should also say that Valis, because we're super context, we should say that Valis is the inspiration for the Barbalith satellite in The Invisibles.
Yeah. So literally the thing that this show is named after is inspired by this book. Okay, here's another conversation during that interview, which is relevant to the publication of the book. And this gets back to this thing that I was mentioning earlier about Valis System A. The interviewer says, in an interview in 1976, you indicated that Valis had already been sold to Bantam Books, but it didn't appear until earlier this year. What caused the delay? Dick says, well, Bantam held it up for a while because they had a change in editorship. The version that has been published was written in 1978. I guess they had a backlog. They didn't print it right away, but the real origin of the delay was the fact that I did, for the first time in my life, two completely different versions of the same book. The first version appears in the second as the movie they go to, but I wasn't satisfied with that version. I wanted to do a book that was better than my previous novel, A Skinner Darkly. And even after Bantam had purchased Valis and all that was required was that I type a final draft, I simply was not satisfied that I had done the best book I could do.
So, in this answer from Philip K. Dick, the editor is calling a book Valis that was sold in 1976, which we called Valis System A earlier.
Yeah.
And Dick just rolls with it. He's like, yes, they bought Valis. And then when it was time for me to type it up as a final draft, I was like, nah,
Hmm.
let me write you a new one.
Yeah. We're going to get into this in a little bit, but he had pretty like strict creative rules for himself, especially around this period of time, as he was becoming incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And he died right before Blade Runner came out, which is really, I think, when he took off even more into popular consciousness. All right, so we mentioned Bantam books. I think Charlie and I, given our age, recognize that name because it was on the side of many a paperback that
Oh,
we
I'm,
would
I'm
pick up in a
instantly
bookstore.
nostalgic and comforted by the word
Yeah.
bantam.
Um, but let's unpack real quick what this is. It was an American publishing house that was owned by Random House, and it was formed in 1945. It was purchased several times by various companies, but it was eventually bought by Bertelsmann in 1986. And then they merged it with Dell in 1999, and then that was merged with Ballantine in 2010. So it's like all of the book publishers from our childhood all get smushed together into one thing. Bertelsmann acquired only half of Bantam in 1977, and then they assumed full ownership in 1980. So
So
the
there's
reason
your
why this is
change in editorship.
exactly, yeah, that's why that's important because that is when VALIS is purchased and then when it's published. Um, if you're unfamiliar, it began as a mass market publisher. It used to be reprints of hardcover books with some original paperbacks, and then they expanded into doing trade paperbacks. They did their own hardcovers. Um, I mean, I think when I think of Bantam, I think of like tiny pulp size paperback novels that you could pick up at the grocery store.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of a companion to Signet books.
Mm-hmm. All right. Divine Invasion. You ready for this?
I am totally ready for this. So Divine Invasion came out in 1981. It was conceived as a sequel to Dick's Valis. And by that, it could be that Dick said, hey, this is going to be a sequel, or it could be that the editor said, this seems like it should be a sequel to Valis, but it
Hmm.
shares no characters and very few plot elements. In fact, it's really not even plot elements so much as there's just some vibes that are the same. The book
Yeah.
had the working title of Valis Regained. Both novels do depict divine information imparted by means of pink beams of light. I feel like that's not a plot element so much as it's a artistic conceit. Uh,
Sure.
both novels suggest that there was a fall resulting in impairment to the Godhead, but that some sort of divine method of repair is being processed. They both reference a fictitious film titled Valis that was made by a rock musician named Eric Lampton, and that's David Bowie, featuring synchronicity music by a fictitious composer named Brent
I
Minnie.
can't believe I haven't mentioned this until now. So the last episode we did is
Yep,
the Brian Eno episode, and this Brent Mini character
is
is
Brian
Brian
Eno.
Eno.
Totally.
Yeah.
Both novels reference Linda Ronstadt. The name Linda appears in both books. And then here's a weird one. Okay. In both novels, a character has a dream that conveys the notion that slippers need to be put on in order for said character to approach the dawn. I have no memory of that.
I don't
That's
either.
in the
Yeah.
notes here.
It's very Lynchian.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
5 sentence summary of the divine invasion. Herb Asher is a recluse living on a remote planet in an isolated dome next door to his sick female neighbor, Ribis Rami. He is visited by a local deity named Yah and the immortal Elijah from the Bible, who encourages Asher to visit Ribis, impregnate her, and smuggle the unborn baby back to Earth. Reborn in human form, Yah, now called Emmanuel, and his friend Xena, actually the part of Yah known as Shekinah, plan to confront the fallen angel Belial, Belial,
Belial.
who has
Man,
been
you clearly don't do tarot.
not even a little bit, who has been ruling Earth for thousands of years as a demiurge false deity. Boy, that sentence is doing a lot of summary work.
Yeah, hey, I really worked hard to fit into five.
How are we saying that? Angels
Belial.
Belial. Belial's forces, including powerful elites from the government, science, artificial intelligence, and clergy, attempt to kill the baby in several bungled attempts. Xena shows Emmanuel a parallel universe where they free Belial, who tries to retain control of the world by manipulating Asher, who is ultimately saved by a pop singer he loves named Linda Asher. Dude, I mean, that actually makes less sense to me than the book itself.
Yeah, that's probably my fault.
Yeah, probably. But when I completed the book, it all made sense, even though I felt like I had been all around the world and up in the
Hmm.
clouds. But reading that, I'm like, is that what happened in the book? I don't even remember that.
Yeah. Um, Here's how you remember Belial. That's the name of the monster character in the basket case movies. The little brother in the basket.
I think you have me confused with my brother Jack.
Come on. You haven't seen Basket Case?
Can we move on?
No.
Yes, we can. This book did not come out from Bantam. This came out from Timescape Books, which was an imprint, no, a line from Pocket Books, which was an imprint of Simon and Schuster that operated from 1981 to 1985. Now, I am dismissive of imprints and lines these days because it just seems like, well, it's
Yeah.
just an office that is under
Yep.
another corporate name. But at the time, I guess there was a very explicit like charge and freedom put into the imprints. You know, we'll fund you. You get to do your own thing. It doesn't reflect back on the larger corporation.
I think, yeah, I think they had mission statements.
Yeah.
And I think probably most of the people who worked within those lines and imprints took those seriously, but it was also marketing.
Yeah. Timescape was named after a Gregory Benford novel. And it was a successful science fiction imprint. Many of its titles were nominees or winners of Hugo and Nebula Awards. It published more than 30 original hardcover works and over 100 paperback titles, but ultimately it didn't make enough money to survive.
I've never heard of it before now. I mean, I know Simon and Schuster, but I'm sure I've read some Timescape books before, but I don't recall it.
Well, it's a good reminder that most of everything doesn't survive.
Yes.
You know, like 100
Entropy is
paperback
real.
titles, you know, and we're not like, oh yeah, Timescape, I read that book by, you know.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention before we get into Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Over the years, the covers to these books are wild. I really like the art on a lot of them. The versions that I got when I first read Valis were from the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, and so they were kind of like a little Photoshop psychedelic-y.
Was this
But
the Silver Surfer
yeah,
flying
yeah.
without
Uh,
his surfboard?
But there's also some hand illustrated ones from I think the first editions that are really cool.
And even the sort of not dumbed down, but the de-represented covers, the kind of gradient color covers
Hmm.
on the Mariner Books editions.
Mm.
Those are really subtle and beautiful too.
Hmm.
Those
Yeah.
feel good, especially to look at the three all together. It's like,
Oh
oh, these are
yeah.
just waves of energy, you know.
Hmm. All right. Last of the, well, it's actually not the last, but it's the last that we read. The Transmigration of Timothy Archer comes out in 1982. This is a non-science fiction literary work. It's based on the mysterious death in the desert of Bishop James Pike, who is a person I was not familiar with until now.
Yeah, who was a
Um,
friend of Philip K. Dick's.
yeah. So apparently, like if you were alive at the time, you would know who James Pike was. He was kind of a popular culture figure. He was an American Episcopal bishop, and he was accused of heresy by other church leaders because of his views on theological and social issues. He's what I think we would refer to as progressive nowadays. He was an early proponent both of the ordination of women and desegregation within churches. He explored spiritualism and psychic phenomenon in an effort to contact his deceased son, which is in the book. And then he died on a trip to Israel when he got lost in the desert and he slipped from a canyon wall, falling 60 feet to his death, which is also in the book.
The reason that he was there might be
I think
um,
it's a little different, right?
exaggerated.
I
And
don't know if he
yeah,
was also looking for mushrooms that are also Jesus.
well, don't jump ahead.
Sorry.
5 sentence summary. Go for it, man.
A woman named Angel flashes back to the story of how her husband, her father-in-law, and his lover all died and or killed themselves. Timothy Archer is her father-in-law, and he's also the California Bishop of the Episcopal Church, who discovers historical truths about Jesus that makes him doubt the Bible and reconsider his role in the church, while also starting a secret affair with a friend of Angel's, whose name is Kirsten, which causes Angel's husband to then kill himself in jealousy of them both.
Okay, that's true, but that needs just a little, little maybe unpacking. Angel is the daughter-in-law of Timothy Archer, so her husband is Timothy Archer's son.
Yes.
Timothy Archer's son is maybe in love with Kirsten, or maybe just compelled to take validation from her. So when his dad takes up with Kirsten, he kills himself in jealousy.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And he's jealous of her because she's getting his father's attention and he's not.
Yeah. It does not get creepy and incestuous in that way. It's much more of a psychological turmoil.
Yeah, Dick is interestingly like he just skates right around any of that because there's multiple implications in here of like sort of bizarre relationships that um he's like that's not what I'm interested in. Here's 5 pages on theological theory. Uh,
Gnosis, yeah.
yeah. Okay. In Grief and Guilt, after Jeff kills himself, Archer and Kirsten believe that they've been contacted by Jeff's spirit with proof of the afterlife, which leads them and Angel to visit a medium who predicts that Kirsten will die soon.
Let's take another moment. I just read that fucking scene before I went to therapy and was told that my therapist had
She talked to her ghost.
gone to a medium
Yeah.
and
So,
through the
okay, I can
internet
see
just to
why
make
you
it
were
really wild.
influenced. Yeah. Oh, she did it over Zoom.
Yeah.
Um, Fourth sentence. Kirsten, by the way, in remission from cancer, kills herself in jealousy of Archer and Angel's friendship. While Archer then goes to Israel, subsequently gets lost and falls off a cliff and dies. I did not mention the mushrooms. He goes to Israel to find these mushrooms that he believes were used to induce psychedelic experiences by is it the Zadokite? Uh,
You don't even have to get into the details.
yeah,
If it's a physical thing that does what Jesus said his transubstantiation would do, then that's the whole doubting the Bible and reconsidering the church thing.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've gotten to the point where everybody's dead but Angel. On the day that John Lennon is murdered, Angel visits a houseboat presentation by a psychedelic guru whose name I forget, and is reunited with Kirsten's schizophrenic son, who then claims that Archer's reincarnated spirit is within him.
Yeah, that's that book.
That character just kind of like flits in and out of the rest of the story, shows up and seem it's funny because every time he shows up, he's like perfectly rational and like the most like compassionate person in the story. And then he leaves and off screen, everybody's like, oh boy, he's super crazy. He like threw a trash can through the window of Starbucks and he's been institutionalized, you know.
I mean, there has to be some processing of his own self, his own identity by Dick in that character.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay. So Dick says about this book, I've managed to put into Timothy Archer two very good characters, the bishop himself and the protagonist, a young woman, a lot more educated than I am, a lot smarter than I am. I don't know about that. A lot more rational than I am. I was very much into a postpartum depression after I finished writing it because I was so happy enjoying her company, listening to her dialogues. I really fell in love with her. She's entirely fictional as far as I know, an ad hoc creation like Pallas Athena from the brow of Zeus out of nothing.
I think we're going to come back to this because it's important to representation. And when we look at Dick's body of work, I don't believe prior to this, I may be wrong, that he has ever had a female protagonist.
Hmm. And he wrote this one in first person.
Yeah. He goes on, he's talking about the bishop, and he says, I needed a protagonist who was smart enough to understand the bishop, loving enough to forgive him. That's a tall order because the bishop is a very mercurial, complex person who does many things which are dubious ethically. Angel intellectually understands what he's doing. She's able to love him. In a sense, she is more profoundly a wise person than the bishop himself. I want to pause to just interject with something that I thought was really subtly amazing about this book, which is every scene that the Timothy Archer bishop shows up in, he without being mean about it, he's totally dismissive of everybody around him.
I mean, yeah,
And
he's in his own world.
yeah, anytime anybody directly asks him a question, he doesn't answer it. He just keeps prattling on about whatever is going on with him at the time. He very rarely is engaged in or interested in the inner lives of the people around him. He's just constantly it's the old man trying to figure out the secret of the universe, right?
Mm,
Like he's analyzing everything to come up with a unified theory of everything,
yeah.
which keeps coming back to these mushrooms.
And this is his friend. This is Dick's friend that
Yeah,
he's sort of rendering.
yeah.
And it's interesting to read this explanation from Dick himself about what the book leads up to. The climax of the book is the effect on Angel of Timothy's death. She says that it turned her into a machine. When she heard that he was dead in Israel, she devolved to the level of a machine and lost her own human nature in a period where she is just tragically reified and knows it. But at the end of the book, a Sufi scholar who is giving seminars in Sausalito is able to restore her to the state of a human being. It's not a bummer ending, it is a very positive ending.
I believe that the scholar, the guru guy on the
Mm-hmm.
boat, is meant to be Alan Watts.
I mean, it does ring that way. Yeah. That is not how I took the end of the book. And I don't know better than the author, obviously, but
Mm,
to me, there was a certain amount of settling away from the mystical and the psychedelic and the schizophrenic. This sort of, it wasn't a bummer ending. I thought it was a positive ending, but instead of being restored from the level of machine to human nature, it was more like, oh, this seems like um, a rendering of what it's like to come out of the fugues, to come out of the psychosis, and to feel safe and untouched by other people's frantic passions and enthusiasms.
hmm I don't think Dick had the language for this, but we know from what we discussed previously that he went through a lot of trauma and grief.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a book about a person who goes through a lot of trauma and grief. And yet her response to all of that is not she as a character, she does not seem to be grieving, right? Like she
I mean,
doesn't
her,
really talk about it. She withdraws
yeah,
from the world, I
yeah.
think.
Her grief is denial.
Yeah.
Like when she just focuses on her job and she just
Yeah.
like burrows down and doesn't connect to anybody.
Yeah. And so I think within this character, like he's coming like so close to understanding himself a little bit better, you know? I don't know if he actually did or not. Like from the quotes that he just read, I don't know. It sounds like he was falling in love with a version of himself. Um,
Well, he was rendering a
maybe I was just gonna say maybe giving him some compassion, being compassionate with himself in a way that he maybe hadn't been before.
nice. Oh, I like that. Okay, so this is him talking about the trilogy idea, right?
Mm,
Because it wasn't what he set out to do. Timothy Archer is essentially the third novel in a trilogy of which Valis is the first and The Divine Invasion is the second, which is sort of interesting because each book is unique. It really was necessary for me to do the novel as a projection of thematic material going back years and years and years in my writing, in stuff even as early as Eye in the Sky and Time Out of Joint. Those themes are constant preoccupations with me. They unfold by their own inner organic drive. And I don't really have the option of aborting that process and just suddenly going into a completely commercialized thing aimed at 12-year-olds.
Okay,
Okay,
let's unpack
wow.
this. So, in this interview, he he had the option of either writing Blade Runner's novelization, which Blade Runner is based on a book he already wrote, so why would he rewrite the book? But and then it was that or write Timothy Archer, and he was like, "Fuck you, I'm writing Timothy Archer,"
You know,
and he's
it
crazy dismissive of Blade Runner in
yeah,
this
it
interview.
wasn't even fuck you though. It was
Yeah,
uh no, I don't care. It was just a no, I'm not doing that. I'm not writing the book again in a bad way. He calls it a cheapo
yeah,
novelization.
yeah,
He says, I may find that I've turned down $400,000. That clearly was the fee for writing
yeah.
the book Blade Runner as opposed to the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But he
Um,
says, I never went into writing for money anyway.
so okay, so in the research for this, he talks about this Blade Runner thing a lot.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get away from that. So I wanted to say there are a lot of quotes. Then there were so many quotes that I don't think are really part of our mission in this episode. So I'm not particularly interested in diving super deep into it, other than that he struggled with the fact that the movie was being made. He both liked what he had seen from Ridley Scott and hated it.
Yeah.
And but I don't think like ultimately that it's relevant to understanding the Valis trilogy. It's just something he seemed to be bitter about at the time.
Well, it's part of understanding the production that he
Yes.
did make a choice to not take the easy cash, which was available to him. He clearly could have written a book that would have been okay for kids to read, that,
Hmm.
you know, transformed his original novel into a version of the movie that operated like his novel. It would have sold just by being attached to a movie. But instead, he said, I'm going for this idea that's been driving me.
Yeah.
He,
Yeah.
quote unquote, needed to write this book.
Just two more things about the Blade Runner thing I think are maybe fun for us to talk about for a second, which is he says here that they offered to cut him in on the merchandising rights, which I don't particularly remember Blade Runner having like big, because it wasn't a super hit at the time.
Well, this
It,
was after Star Wars, so everybody was
yeah,
ready to have action figures and props and
lunch
things like that.
boxes and stuff. Yeah, yeah. I don't really remember. I'm sure there were some of them, but I don't remember them being a lot. Um, yeah, just the idea. Okay, I like Blade Runner a lot, but I can't remember. Is it rated R or PG-13?
It's got to be R, doesn't it?
You think? Because why would they then want him to write a 12-year-old version of the novel for a movie that 12-year-olds couldn't see?
Because 12-year-olds couldn't see it. But also, he's saying that. They're not saying
Right.
that.
Good point.
They
Good
were
point.
they were saying to him, "Hey, we need you to write the book, but you can't get all all
Yeah.
kooky. It's got to
You
be
can't write about the pink light that you saw in
it's got to be
1974.
for people to read who are not looking for literary science fiction."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point.
Now,
Okay. It's his
he
shorthand version.
he finished the book and he gave it to his agent, and this is the part that I really like.
Yeah.
His agent said to him, "You know, in your science fiction, they drive things called flobbles and quibbles, and in this one, meaning the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, they drive Hondas. But it's still essentially a science fiction novel, although I can't explain exactly how," which I think is completely accurate. Dick says, it's really as if the world caught up with science fiction. The years went by and the disparity, the temporal gap began to close until finally there was no temporal gap. We were no longer writing about the future. In a sense, the very concept of projecting it ahead is meaningless because we are there literally in our actual world. Now, here's something I want to say about that. This is the most middle aged man thing that we've said so far. Because
Mm.
every damn person thinks that when they're young, they're projecting into the future. But now, oh, things are like I said, and they're not really going to progress from here. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Um, and he also, this is, I mentioned earlier that he, took these projects very seriously. He says, The VALIS Trilogy is something that is extremely important to me in terms of the organic development of my ideas and preoccupations in my
Yeah.
writing. So for me to derail myself and do a cheapo novelization of Blade Runner, a completely commercialized thing aimed at 12-year-olds, would have probably been disastrous to me artistically. And then he says this. I don't think my agent figures I'm going to live very much longer. And he died like real soon after this
I know, but
interview.
yeah, but what he's saying is set for life means I'm not going to be around for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. He makes it extremely clear like this is a passion project for him. This is something
Yeah.
extremely important to him. Whereas clearly Blade Runner was not.
Well, he was past those concerns.
Yeah.
When we read him talking about what he was doing at the time, occupationally, personally, Angel Archer in the book is him working himself out. He says, I was in the retail record business. I managed one of the largest record stores on the West Coast in the 50s. That happens to
Yeah.
Angel. She works in a record store and then she rises up to the level of, maintaining everything. She goes from being a minor capitalist cog who's trying to, find life outside. When she goes into grief, kind of grief psychosis,
Yeah.
she becomes her job.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I also I liked this description that he said about his divorces, which the character of Angel isn't divorced, but her husband kills himself. As regards to my personal background, an endless succession of divorces, all stemming from recklessly engaged in and seized upon marriages.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh, we need to get to this last referenced text so we
yeah,
can have a break.
I agree. Yeah.
The Owl in Daylight was the quote unquote actual third novel in the trilogy.
So yeah, in that American Library edition that I have that collects all the books together, in the chronology, it says a few months after he finished writing The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, he, quote, received a nighttime vision of a savior named Tagore, who Dick was convinced is alive and living in Ceylon, and from whom he begins to feel he's receiving instructions. So it's like it starts all over again, right?
I mean,
Like,
yeah, that seems like a recurrence of a mental condition.
hmm. Yeah. I love the way in which it's written because it reminds me of the scene in Ghostbusters when Rick Moranis first gets possessed and
Oh,
he's
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
rattling off all of the like mythology
Yeah.
to people. And that's what this stuff sounds like. I received a vision of a savior named Tagore.
It is a striking difference between the transmigration of Timothy Archer and this next idea, which is two existences in one time,
Hmm.
communication across great distances through supernatural means, a rendering of biblical themes again, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I prefer, I prefer the three novels that we read as the trilogy. It works in that kind of, I think this is almost a European thing to have trilogies that are declared connected, even though they are not a single story or a single character going from book to book. And you just understand
Hmm.
them as an overall experience that you're supposed to pull from.
John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy.
Sure. The Three Colors movie trilogy,
Mm.
the Red Riding series, that kind of thing.
Who knows though? Like we'll never read that book.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have been interesting.
Well,
I
some
j
people wanted us to read the book.
well, yeah, so that's what I wanted to put a pin on here and then we can break. Several people who are close to him dispute what they believe was going to be the content in this unfinished book. There is a bunch of published interviews, analyzation of his letters and his notebooks that point to all these different possibilities of what the Owl in Daylight would be about. I don't feel comfortable diving into those details here. I feel like it's unfinished and whatever would be put out there doesn't really reflect Dick's own intentions.
Yeah. His ex wife, Tessa, one of the five, She wrote her own version. It was published in 2009, and it's described as using little to none of Dick's material. She said, I attempted to express the spirit of Phil's proposed novel without using his plot or the one character that he had created. Phil had written very little about this novel. It was very sketchy and did not even name any characters. The Owl in Daylight is my concept of what Phil's novel should be. And the only thing we can say about that is that at the request of his estate, she voluntarily removed her novel from publication.
Yeah, I that seems so wrong-sided to me. I believe Tessa is the woman who was 18 when they got married.
Okay. Well, let's take a break. We're 1/10 done with this episode.
Yeah, we're only 2 hours in.
Chris,
Hello.
we've been recording for like so long.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Patreon.com/super context.
What is that?
That's where you should go. You don't like that? Okay.
No, I think that's it. That's
Okay.
it. It's done. That's the whole thing. What's the simplest ad ever? URL. This is where you should go.
Yeah.
I love it. As a person who writes ads for a living. Okay, we're back. This next section is about the consumption of this book. And there's kind of two caveats I want to say up top. The first is I looked up a ton of reviews, and most of the ones that I found were just simply descriptions of the plot of the books
Mm-hmm.
with like a bare minimum of context about its publication. And when I say context, like the author, the year it came out, what he's known for. And then it's just plot.
So this is the thing that I always try to remember. When science fiction authors talked about the ghetto of science fiction, which is an actual quote from multiple authors in the 70s and 60s, or people talk about science fiction and fantasy not being taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I have to remember that they really meant it back then. It's not like now where you sort of say, oh, fantasy and science fiction aren't taken seriously, but it's a tremendous industry. And
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is a huge HBO show. And, you know, Lord of the Rings is a movie franchise and all this stuff. Back then, people who didn't care about science fiction and fantasy actively dismissed it, you know?
Yes, but the reviews didn't read like people who didn't care about science fiction and fantasy. It just read like they didn't have any analysis.
Well, that's my point. They were just like, hey, here's this book and it's about this kind of thing if you're into that.
Yeah. I also think too, it's important for us to remember because it's easy to forget that when these books came out, this kind of thing sold so much more than it sells now. And that gets to my second point, which is that we don't have any sales numbers. I looked, I couldn't find them. This is pretty common whenever we do book
Mm-hmm.
episodes. Like publishers aren't keen on revealing how many copies they've
So
sold.
you can track down through publisher portals and a service called BookScan. You can track down a kind of survey of book sales, and I think those are just contemporary. I have not done it. I
Mm,
don't think that we get enough value for the podcast for the amount of money it would cost to subscribe to these portals.
yeah.
So we've had to give up on the dream of sales numbers that we can validate. I have, however, thought that what we can do is count the editions of the books.
Hmm.
That's kind of representative of popularity and the legs that it has. For VALIS, it had, and to the best of my ability, it had 8 paperback editions from 1981 to 2012, and 2 hardback editions that were in 1987 and 2001. So I think that's a successful book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
And
those,
again, like considering the print runs in 1981,
yeah,
right?
because those editions are different publishers, people getting the
Yeah.
rights and then republishing, not just print runs. A hardback edition many years after it was released as a paperback original, that's also a
Yeah.
sign of validation and
Yeah.
the potential sales for a hardback edition.
Not to mention that, as I mentioned, I'm reading from the American
Yeah,
Library
right.
edition, right?
I
Like,
didn't include any of the collections in those editions because
okay.
that's another thing altogether.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then looking over the reviews, it's like, oh, these people were all reading different books.
Right. So I think for me, the purpose of looking at these reviews is to sort of figure out if there is a consensus of what people in general thought about this book, and then if there's not, trying to understand why. And the first batch here, these are all from the Wikipedia entry. They're linked and sourced, but these were not online links, so I
Yeah.
couldn't go verify any of them. But let's fly through these pretty quickly.
So Greg Kostakian reviewed Valis in Aries magazine, said the plot is minor, characterization's poor, prose is unexciting. Philosophy and deft manipulation of mood are not enough to carry the book. I disagree totally.
And then we've got Dave Langford, who's reviewing Valis in White Dwarf number 98. I'm assuming that these are science fiction zines
Yeah,
of the
they have to
time.
be. Yeah, yeah.
He said, here, a hard-headed dick gently mocks the weird metaphysics of fat through a series of wonderfully insane conversations and misadventures, a slapstick tightrope dance over a bit of potential insanity, a wrestle with demons in which both inside and outside Valis, Dick is the unexpected winner. I think that's more in line with our interpretation.
Yeah. So Langford got the memo about it being a picaresque.
Yes.
Thomas M. Dish, who is a famous reviewer and famous for being kind of sharp when he didn't like something,
Okay.
he said, the fascination of the book, what's most artful and confounding about it, is the way the line between dick and fat shifts and wavers. I agree with that. It's a really amazing,
Balancing act.
yeah, yeah, a magic trick that he pulled off.
Hmm.
But Dish also says the novel as a whole novel went off the rails sometimes, but the first half holds together wonderfully, considering how much there is to be held together.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I would just say that that's part of why I love it. And I think you know this about me, and I've said it before on the show. Like, I love things that are ambitious but flawed.
Sure. I think the way it goes off the rails is the same way that the movie Mandy goes off the rails.
Oh, yeah. That's an
It goes to a
interesting.
completely different place, but then
Yeah.
is very successful in that place.
I don't believe that I knew that you had watched Mandy. We're gonna have to talk about it sometime.
Absolutely.
Umberto Rossi posits that some degree of academic discomfort towards the novel has resulted from the uncertainty of whether Dick genuinely believed in the fantastical aspects of the narrative, which was then further supported by the exegesis, in detailing the many ideological shunts between skepticism and belief which occur within the plot. Rossi concludes that Dick intended neither view to achieve hegemony. Boy, this is academic, but that the synthesis of both effectively depict, quote, the unyielding contradictions in Dick's experience of self. Being involved in a quest does not automatically confer enlightenment, but rather involves a search for the light. The condition of the quester is one of doubt, not certainty. Okay, I think what he's saying there is that even Dick himself isn't landing on this is real or this is not real, right?
Yeah.
He's willing to embrace the uncertainty.
And that's interesting because it points to Dick's reality brand. You know, the
Hmm.
author, Philip K. Dick, was present in people's understandings of the book also.
Yeah, yeah. I also went and dug up library journal reviews. I have a quick question for you as a librarian who may
Okie
be
doke.
more familiar with library journal than me. What is like most of these reviews were like one or two paragraphs, and again, they were mostly just descriptions of the plot.
Yeah. Uh, a magazine like Library Journal in the 80s was meant to help librarians understand what they might buy and
So it's
whether it
for
was worth the buy.
circulation. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's Rosemary Herbert, writing for the Library Journal in 1981. The success of this complex narrative depends upon the likability of the confused Horselover Fat, whose mental problems begin as he loses a friend to suicide and then experiences what may be a genuine communion with God. I'm going to jump ahead here. This is her review, one sentence. Dick keeps us guessing and highly interested as he considers comparative religious, psychological, and science fictional possibilities. So that's pretty neutral. That's, as you're saying, like,
Yeah.
that is just like, this is what this book is. Maybe you want to get it for your collection.
We have some more current reviews. Let me hit the last 1981 review that we've got here. Ian Mathers wrote, uh, I was watching TV the other day in the middle of the afternoon, just flipping around between channels when I happened to come upon a religious show. And then he says, the evangelist turned to the viewer and said, religion is a glorious affliction of the heart. I remember thinking this odd and remarking to myself that you find truth in the strangest places. This is true of Philip K. Dick's magnum opus Valis. So, I mean, what a comparison.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's somewhat accurate, right? Like, and Dick would maybe even embrace that himself, given that he went on to write about an evangelist.
Yeah. Mathers says that Valis is a novel loaded down with so much hidden portent and symbolic significance, one could argue the meaning and intent behind it for years without conclusion, which is kind of calling it like, oh, now this is going to be an academically interrogated text. To paraphrase Ursula K. Le Guin, what Dick is entertaining us with here is death and madness, religion and truth.
Yeah, and this I thought was interesting. Dick said this in an interview shortly before Valish was published. There are two types of people who will hate this book: non-Christians who wouldn't like all the religious imagery and content, and Christians who would find it heretical. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I do like that.
Okay, the next review is from Commonweal Magazine, written by John Garvey, and Charlie has just off air looked this up, and we have confirmed that this is a literary magazine devoted to Catholic thought, but looking at publications in pop culture.
It's a Catholic journal, and
Yeah,
it is not to be trifled with.
that's what it says on the cover.
That's me.
Commonweal,
That's me saying
not
it.
to be trifled with. Garvey writes, Dick creates characters who struggle not only for salvation, but ultimate truths, sometimes merely to be decent human beings. And those struggles are really won. I think that right there is key to understanding this book. Let's repeat that. Characters are struggling for salvation, but they're also struggling to be decent human beings, and those are the same thing.
Yeah.
What reality is and what it means to be authentically human are intrinsically linked. Then he jumps down. He says, many Gnostic writings advance an elitism that delights in being among the chosen in whom the divine light resides. My father. Dick saw glimmers of the shattered divine light in many confused and struggling people, and he found something of cosmic significance there, both in the light and in the struggle.
So this is 2007, and it's being, reevaluated, the novel, or being brought up again by a Catholic magazine under the title "A Real Gnostic Gospel."
Yeah. Before we get into the last review in here, I want to sum these up. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, Charlie, but what I'm seeing are sort of two different kinds of review. There's the one that takes it seriously and somewhat embraces the scattered nature of it, and despite the fact that it is like highly intellectual and it's
Yeah.
trying to tie together all these different religious and philosophical ideas. And then there's the kind that's just sort of like, this doesn't really work. It's on a literary level, it doesn't work, and I don't care for this.
Yeah. I think if you say, "Ooh, look at this new science fiction book with a silver android-looking person flying directly at me from the cover," uh, called Valis, and on the back it says "Vast Active Living Intelligence System." Oh, it's going to be about aliens and war and things like that. Great, let me dive into it.
Hmm.
And then you get this like interrogation of the suicidal drive to start the book off.
Hmm.
You're gonna
Hmm.
get thrown pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that sort of gives us a sense of like both how it was received at the time and how what its legacy is, maybe.
Yeah.
And then there's this review, which
I'm worried about this. I'm
uh,
not sure, Chris.
I just realized was published 15 days ago as we're recording this. October 25th, 2025 is when this was
Is it
published.
possible that this thing happened because you were searching for Philip K. Dick's Valis and the internet read your desire and produced something for you?
Well, I think you could be right here, and I'll tell you why after we read a little bit of this review. So I'll tell you my experience. I found this review. It was one of the top 5 links that came up when I searched something like Philip K. Dick Valis review. And it is on a site called rickbo.com. It's written by somebody named Sarah Whitmore. And as I was reading through it, I was like, wow, this is the first like really truly like in-depth assessment of this book that I've found. It's more in line with what I was looking for, and which is why I put so many paragraphs from it in here. Uh, this novel does not merely narrate a story, it invites readers to traverse the fragile boundary between the known and the transcendent, challenging perceptions of existence, faith, and madness. It's not merely a question of what is real, but how reality is constructed, whether it's through divine intervention, mental fragmentation, or collective consciousness. Valis navigates the labyrinth of divinity through the intertwined lenses of Gnosticism and traditional theology. There's just a lot of stuff here that's pretty dense. And as I was looking through it, I noticed that the writer had like broken it up into sections where they were assessing it based on various literary devices and tropes, and these sections had these tables in them that like broke it down very clearly. And then I get to the bottom, and one of the tables is whether or not Philip K. Dick's Valis is a good book for generating AI imagery. And in assessing whether or not it's good for that or not. And I literally at my desk, like pushed my chair back and was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. And I realized I'm pretty sure this review was written by AI.
Oh, you don't think that someone wrote the sentence to truly evoke the labyrinth nature of Valis through AI generated imagery? Consider blending surreal, dreamlike landscapes with elements of cosmic mysticism in a review called A Thoughtful Review of Philip K. Dick's Valis.
Yeah. Um, and I thought, normally I would throw that away, but I thought it was so ironic and funny given the nature of this book, the nature of the idea. It literally says, let me go back to this quote. It's not a question of what is real, but how reality is constructed, right? Like here we are in 2025, and we can't do research for an episode of Super Context without getting AI slop in our homework. And I looked up the author. She's got a bio, says that she's a book enthusiast and blogger based in Austin, Texas. Um, she writes, I guess, mainly for rickbo.com, where she shares her perspective to make reading more accessible and enjoyable. That sounds nice. And then I was like, what's rickbo.com? Your trusted source for honest, in-depth book reviews and original children's stories. So I don't know. You've never heard of rickbo.com before today either.
I just went to rickbo.com and I searched for Stephen King using the search function up in the
Ah,
top left.
yeah.
Here are my results. Reflections in the Glass, a thoughtful dive into Stephen King's Wizard and Glass. Journey through Stephen King's The Dark Tower, a tale of mystique and myth. Unpacking Temptation, a thoughtful look at Stephen King's Needful Things. Unveiling Fear and Hate, a thoughtful look at Stephen King's Later. Journey Through Ruin, exploring Stephen King's The Wastelands review. Exploring Darkness and Mystery, a thoughtful review of Stephen King's Black House. Now,
Yeah.
did you notice the weird syntax of the one before that?
Hmm.
Unraveling the Threads of Fear, a review of Stephen King's Dreamcatcher. Rising Above, a thoughtful look at Stephen King's Elevation. I'm out.
Click on one of them. I'm curious if they have the same tables.
The intricate world building and how it shapes the mythos of Wizard and Glass. Character complexity and emotional depth within Stephen King's narrative landscape. The artful balance between fantasy and reality in the Dark Tower series narrative. Fantasy elements, grounded reality.
Yeah.
Theme,
This is
impact on
all, this whole
protagonist,
site
narrative
is
role.
AI.
Yes. Oh my God.
So frustrating.
Any minute now, a pink light is going to hit me.
Yeah, I included this section as an homage to Philip K. Dick because I believe that his paranoia was justified, and we are now in a world where we have to doubt everything that we read and whether or not it was actually written by another human being or not.
Okay, on to the next book.
Yeah.
The Divine Invasion. If we go by what we talked about at the beginning of the review section for VALIS, we can count editions. There have been 5 paperback editions from 1983 to 2011 and 1 hardback edition in 1982. So slightly less uh, focus, slightly fewer editions. It seems like the Divine Invasion might be the dip in the trilogy because
Mm,
these were
mm,
not marketed as a trilogy. They were sort of retroactively declared a trilogy. And the
hmm.
Divine Invasion is a kind of difficult book. As Library Journal said, brilliant but bewildering as he juggles with time and reality, but the persistent reader will find it rewarding.
And then here's another review by that was in Kirkus Reviews upon the release. Profuse muddling plotting in the Dick manner, though without any of the usual Dick playfulness. That's not true. This book's fun.
And that's
Uh,
also a terrible sentence to leave in a review
what Dick playfulness? You don't think that that's fun?
without any of the usual dick playfulness.
Maybe it's a double entendre. This is destined perhaps to be poured over in seminaries, but it is far, far too heavy to attract many mainstream SF readers.
Whatever. Jason Kornick wrote in 1981, Dick makes some very profound comments about human nature that, for this reader, were the most interesting parts of this novel. He explores the balance between good and evil and the expression of divinity in each person that combines to form the collective God that might just be very different from that which we worship. The Divine Invasion is truly an exploration of the human notion of God. That's a really intense review to follow up
Yeah.
brilliant but bewildering or uh, without any of the usual Dick playfulness.
I'm so we've been recording for 3 hours, and that sentence said over and over again gets increasingly
I mean, we
hilarious.
can bring it back later.
Yeah.
It does seem like the Divine Invasion uh, read like the kind of caricature of Philip K. Dick's novels. You know, the idea that it was a difficult read, that it was kind of kooky crazy, that it was about these things but didn't really do a great job of delivering them.
Mm.
Um, it is distinctly different in reception from Valis. The end of that Kornick review is The Divine Invasion is a very complex novel that uses science fiction only as a springboard for the expression of very intricate ideas of religion, fate, and ultimately human destiny. There's a lot that an open minded and educated reader can get out of The Divine Invasion. This novel is full of possibilities, but also limited by its own lack of focus. As one reads deeper into this novel, they will discover philosophical truths that are obscured from view and could only have come from the mind of Philip K. Dick. That is, if they don't go crazy first.
I just want to say that my experience subjectively reading The Divine Invasion was that I think of the 3 books, this is the most linear and the most straightforward to read. It's not hopping around back and forth in time. You're not, there is an alternate reality that you
I
jump
think
back
that's
and
the
forth
most
between.
confusing part of it is that
Yeah.
there's this understanding that's everything's happening in the brain of a body that's being held in a medically induced coma of some
Yeah.
kind.
I don't know. I just didn't find it complex. I think the complexity was maybe like diving in and out of philosophy, but that's no different
Yeah.
than the rest of these books.
I will say that um, it helped my reading to know that I was reading the middle book of a set that we decided we were going to read,
Hmm.
and that I was reading Valis, The Divine Invasion, and the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, and that it was all one thing, and I just kind of had to write it, you know?
Yeah. Although I'm pretty sure when each of us started one of these books, we immediately started texting each other how awesome we thought they were
Oh my
and like
God, they're
quotes
so
from them.
fucking good, Chris.
Yeah.
They are like, I mean, I don't want to rely on drug metaphors to describe the experience of reading these books. So I can't really describe how it felt to start these books and have my brain crack open.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's wrap up the reviews here with the Transmigration of Timothy Archer.
Yes. And let's start with the editions. I'm sorry, I just finished counting those up right before we started recording.
Okay.
I've got 5 paperback editions and 1 hardback edition.
Mm,
So the same as the Divine Invasion.
okay. So clearly Valis is the most popular of the three of these.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, Divine Invasion and Transmigration of Timothy Archer are the ones that got a hardback first printing. But VALIS
Oh,
started as a mass market paperback.
okay. All right, so here's a review from Library Journal upon the release of the book. This is an intellectual novel by a prolific science fiction author. Some will enjoy its long discourse on theology, philosophy, and madness. Others will agree with the narrator's assessment. This may be tiresome prattle to you.
Yeah, that is something that is written into the voice of the narrator. This may be tiresome prattle to you, which is a neat little literary trick. The voice of Transmigration reminded me of the voice of Annihilation.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that. Huh. Hmm.
Kirkus Reviews said Transmigration of Timothy Archer is a thoughtful, elegantly constructed work with lots of erudite conversations in the Dick manner. And though the characters remain shadows against their tangled, gloom and doom, religious mystical backdrop, curious readers who recall Pike's mysterious career, and Pike is that bishop who I still cannot get through my head that that guy actually existed, should find this a quietly stimulating, if thoroughly depressing, reconstruction.
And then my hometown alternative weekly newspaper wrote about it at the time of its release. This is the Boston Phoenix in 1982. Philip Zaleski. You know the Phoenix is gone.
Oh, bummer.
That's such a bummer. Um, Zaleski says, it's odd, I suppose, that Dick's career ends in a novel with little fantasy and no science fiction, but a roman à clef about the last years of Bishop Pike seems perfectly apropos. I mean, we gotta give an award to this guy for getting roman à clef and apropos into the same sentence. Bravo.
Okay.
For Pike, shared Dick's need to challenge the status quo. And then he says Pike, like Dick, was a hybrid hipster and pedant, scribbling scholarly tracts on the Trinity while arranging rock masses for his cathedral, which is
Wow.
something that happens in the book.
Yeah,
Right? There's like a conversation about whether or not he should have Janis Joplin play a show at his church, and they're all like, "She's dead." And this is actually perfect example of the Timothy Archer character. He's like, no, I don't think she is."
that's right. Shouldn't I have her? She seems interesting. Yeah,
And
but
then
she's
he
dead.
decides not to because he thinks she's black. And then they're like, no, she's white, but she's dead.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't seem to do his friend Pike any favors by the way that he just puts him into the
Ah,
book.
yeah.
All right.
Uh,
All of these books get reviewed later in their lives. That people are reflecting back on these. In 2016, there's a review on biblioclept.org. This is a book written by an author sure of his abilities, one who could confidently make this novel about big ideas turn on his characters' struggles to control the trivialities of their day to day lives. That's a straight up uh, literary mainstream novel description, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Dick tries to locate a mushy but viable middle ground in this sad, nimble, and touching novel. He writes to commemorate the grinders, the survivors who manage to keep waking up day after day, despite knowing that life often destroys those who dream too large. This is against the backdrop of John Lennon's assassination,
Hmm.
but also, I mean, a lot of death, a lot of loss, from Kennedy on in this era of American living.
Yeah. It's true. Like I think, because we were babies when these books were being released, I think that it is easy for us to forget that there was just kind of a pall that hung over American culture at that time because so many icons were assassinated in public.
And let's not forget, so there were the political unrest and the assassinations of the 60s certainly influenced anybody who was a young adult or adult at the time. But
Yeah.
then they moved into American chaos in the 70s
Hmm.
of stagflation, of Nixon, of Vietnam. And so you get to the 80s and you're heading into and probably recognizing, like, oh, the Reagan Revolution is here. And
Mm.
then this is the
Hmm.
book that was written against that backdrop.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't even thought of that, that this is sort of predicting where we went next. Last sentence I want to read from that review. Dick's best work seems to be filled with screwed up people trying to get by in a world that has been arbitrarily fucked up by war or technology or drug abuse.
Oh, I didn't know Philip K. Dick was a contemporary author.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought the same thing. And maybe that's part of it too, quick aside, I listened to a series of interviews with LP from Run the Jewels a
Oh,
couple years
yeah.
ago, where he did these like every episode was him and Open Mike Eagle, and every episode is about a different album that he worked on. And he frequently talked about how influenced he is by Philip K. Dick, and that like his worldview is the same as Philip K. Dick's, and that like he's inherently paranoid and distrustful of authority. Um, and yeah, I mean, it is, you hit the nail on the head with the Reagan thing, and we're riding that wave, the direction of that wave 40 years later.
LP is so interesting. And that's wild to hear him say, my life viewpoint is like Philip K. Dick's.
Yeah, yeah. I highly recommend that series if you haven't heard it.
I'll get in on it.
They do each season's a different rapper. And I think he's the second season, maybe. There's a season with Prince Paul. It's pretty awesome.
Cool. Let's go ahead and finish off the reviews. Uh, Here is a chunk from a review on fantasyliterature.com. Despite the painful and depressing subject matter, I felt it was a very courageous attempt to search for the reasons behind madness, despair, suicide, religious faith, and whether there is anything that can be done to prevent such tragedies. That is something I feel like we've certainly referenced, but we haven't talked quite enough about. One of the things that makes these books compelling, difficult, and maybe mind blowing is the contrast between science fictiony and psychedelic kind of understanding of the world, and then these like just rock bottom realistic attempts at confronting suicidal ideation in oneself
Hmm.
and trying to recognize what it does to you when someone you know commits suicide.
Yeah, which are clearly personal struggles of his that
Yeah.
were coming through. This review is a good example of this because it's more modern. I think that the theme I'm seeing with like the reception of this is that maybe at the time that these books were released, there were a few people who got it, who, as Dick would refer to in Transmigration of Timothy Archer, were turned on.
Yeah.
But then there were also people who were just like, "This is crazy. This is weird. Most people won't like this. You would only like this if you had an education."
Oh God,
Kind of,
right. Yeah. If you're
you know.
educated, you might get it.
Yeah. And then like the further along we go as these books are reassessed and looked at as like a whole unit, it seems like they're appreciated more for the both the philosophical depth to it, the balancing act of understanding that that depth is also compounded by the both the author and the characters' mental illnesses, and then the very like human nature of the characters themselves struggling with grief and trauma.
Yeah. This review that we are referencing right now, it says, oh, this is not really science fiction or fantasy.
It's not.
If you're a genre reader, you might not enjoy it. But, and here's the quote, for those Philip K. Dick fans intent on knowing his final thoughts on life, it is an important work and well worth reading.
Okay, and then let's transition into representation. There's not a ton here other than, I think it's safe to say uh, Dick and most of his characters are white. I don't believe in any of these books there's any queer characters mentioned. Um,
Oh, I think there's a mention of a lesbian,
is there? Okay.
and there's like mention of the Black Panther Party because he references that as part of
Well,
his own kind of trauma.
one of his wives ran away with a
Yeah,
Black Panther, and then he thought that they broke into his home and
yeah.
messed up all of his stuff.
The thing about representation in these novels that we can really dig in on, and that you and I need to talk about, is that as Valerie Holiday kind of diagnosed in her article, Masculinity in the Novels of Philip K. Dick, the quintessential Dick character is the paradigm of masculine subjectivity in crisis, which I think fits some of what you're talking about when you say, what's this middle aged man trying to figure out the whole world about?
Yep.
Although, so Dick had a very different set of damages or traumas or even kind of concerns than, say, your dad.
Sure. Yeah. She says their characters they're uncertain in their jobs, their interpersonal relationships, and their sense of self.
I think maybe the real thing to say there is these are characters who acknowledge that they are uncertain in their job, acknowledge that they're insecure in their interpersonal relationships,
Hmm.
and know that quite obviously their sense of self is in disarray,
Yeah.
as opposed to my assessment from a distance of your dad, which is that he's like in full blown arrogant denial of any weaknesses that might be revealed by his twists and turns.
Oh, for sure. And I'm too close to it to really trust my own judgment on this. But what I have always said to the rest of my family and people who ask about this is that to me, this what's going on with my father, not with Philip K. Dick, is an example of um, white men being in positions of privilege and power until relatively recently, and there has never been a point in their lives where they couldn't get away with whatever they wanted to do.
Mm.
And suddenly there's accountability. And rather than try to understand why that is, it is the most logical conclusion for why they are no longer in position of power is, well, of course the world must be ending.
Gosh, okay, yeah.
Because the only possible explanation is that it's the apocalypse. It's not anything else.
So my take on this, both from like my actual experience and listening to this, and also triggered a little bit by the stuff that's in this article, is that there's a certain amount of confusion in masculine identity between the world's changed and I don't get the privileges or defenses I used to have,
Hmm.
and also I'm older and my sense of immortality and my um, privileged position as a youthful person, as a male youthful person, is disappearing.
Let's be clear. When you say I'm older, you're referring to you, Charlie, as getting older, not the royal I.
The royal eye. Well, yes, I am doing that, but I'm also saying that I think, yeah, someone who's hitting 70
Yeah.
can certainly say, hey, when I was young, you could slap someone on the ass and it wasn't, a legal case. Or you can
Hmm.
say, I used to be respected and now everyone just wants white men to go away and not talk anymore.
Yep.
I think there's also a little bit of, hey, people used to pay attention to me because I was a young, virile man. And now I am looked through just
Yep.
like I used to look through old people.
Yeah, I think you are nailing it. Yeah. That's my assessment of what's
Yeah.
going on. And I think well, let's continue on, but I think that there is some of that going on here with Philip K. Dick. I wonder if he um were still alive today, where he would be, like if he would be QAnon.
Oh, I mean, so in the in the 70s sense of paranoia, where everything is connected and there are multiple forms of control
Hmm.
being inflicted upon the populace, I think that his paranoia would keep him um, closer to like Unabomber territory.
Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
I just
what I mean is like an aggressive pushback, not a find me a leader to guide us through this.
Well, let's think about this as we go through the rest of Holiday's article summary here, because um, one of the things that I am both confounded by in modern times and understand is how people who used to be progressive have so easily slipped into what we're now calling alt-right or MAGA
Mm-hmm.
territory because, like, somehow conspiracy theories outweigh values and ethics.
This is, you want the world to be more wonderful than it is. This is the there's got to be more than just I'm getting older. There's got to be more than just things are harder now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, back to masculinity in the novels of Philip K. Dick. When Dick represents women in his works, particularly in Valis and Divine Invasion, if they are not essentially irrelevant or reactive, they figure as integral components of the conspiracy webs in which the main male characters are netted. The exception is Timothy Archer, where the main narrator is a woman who is making all of the observations. Holiday does suggest that there might be some misogyny in the way that Dick approaches the world. There's also like more than a few duplicitous women in these books.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's multiple instances where I think the characters are just like, oh, this bitch, like I
Yeah,
can't believe I've got to put up with this. She's awful, she's miserable, and she's dragging me down with her.
but that seems to reflect some psychological realities of a guy who couldn't keep a marriage going and was at what do you say diving into some unneeded and ill-advised marriages.
Yeah. The rest of this Valerie Holiday piece, she essentially makes this argument that we need to remember that Philip K. Dick started out in science fiction during a really conservative era in the genre, and that his critique of American society broke from the genre. But even though he's breaking from that genre, he's still essentially writing from a conservative standpoint in that, like, he doesn't critique gender roles at all in any
Small
of his
c
social.
conservative, right?
Yes, sorry, yes, small C conservative. And she notes Kim Stanley Robinson, another pretty well-known science fiction writer, points out that Dick often used a quote mistress character within his work that mediates between Dick referred to his two male characters as always the big and little protagonists. And we
Like the
see
A
that
and
in
B
these.
story, like
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would say you see that in these books, right? Like Divine Invasion, you've got Herb Asher is maybe little protagonist and big protagonist is Emmanuel. And then between them is the mother character who mistress isn't the right term, but she's not really his wife. And she's often described as this miserable shrew that nobody can stand being
Yeah,
around.
and
And she's
and
just there to be the vessel for the
yeah,
born again God.
and God through a man says, "Go to that woman," and
Yeah.
then the argument is, "I don't want to go to the woman," and it's not about female agency at all.
Yeah.
Overall, I think that this article, Masculinity in the Novels of Philip K. Dick, is kind of just a careful assessment of what feels like it's going to be true, kind of no matter what, which is this was written by a silent generation slash boomer white man who thought of women in the way that most men thought of women at that time.
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think that like despite the fact that he was progressive and part of these countercultural communities, that didn't change his inherent stance on gender roles, right? And this is something we've talked about with Stephen King. We've talked about it with many other writers of that time, David Lynch. Um, let's transition from there into broader identity and themes. And I think this one's going to be tough because this is a book that's just full of philosophy dumps. There's a list here. I'm not even going to go through all of these, Charlie, but there's this just monster list of all of the different religious and philosophical references that he drops
Yeah.
just in Valis.
So instead of dissecting the book and saying, here's all the things, although, I mean, we should say there's everything from um, Buddhism to Sigmund Freud, and then Robert Anton Wilson back to Heraclitus, like just crossing uh, disciplines and lifetimes.
Hmm.
What does this trigger in you to have a book that tries to pull together all of these disparate worldviews and tries to make connections to, at the time, contemporary, and to us now, slightly retro art and life?
I think there's two things that come up for me. The first is another podcast that you and I both enjoy, Philosophize This,
Oh, yeah.
which is comprehensive and still, I don't think, touches some of these philosophies that are listed here. I may be wrong, but I don't know that they have an episode on the Dogon people or Robert Anton Wilson, you know? Um, but I think of, because, okay, let me step back. One of the reasons why I like listening to that show is it actually calms me down and it like gives me like it makes me feel grounded within the like history of the world and
Yeah. Yeah.
realizing that like all the terrible things that are happening today have been happening for centuries and but there's still like we're on a path of progression still.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So, for instance, in Valis, that is very much like a current podcast in that, it's pulling references, it's, telling a story that um, grabs references to all kinds of disparate understandings and historicizes them,
Yeah.
that it helps you feel less chaotic inside because it makes now seem like part of a narrative of some kind, like something that makes sense. Oh, we started here and now we're here. It's
Yeah.
not like, where did this asteroid come from and why is the Earth broken into pieces?
It's you know that book by Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature? It's
I
that.
don't know it because I
So
won't read him.
yeah. Ironically, my therapist recommended that I read it. And the argument that he makes in there is essentially that one. Like, if you look at the course of human history, as bad as things seem like they are right now because we're immersed in 24-hour news cycles and social
Mm-hmm.
media, they're actually better. And we are on a path of progression toward like a more peaceful society. Um, so that's the first thing that I think of when I
Yeah.
see all these things getting pulled together. The second thing is one of the things that is mentioned in here we have not brought up yet, and I think it's crucial to understanding why Dick was at this point, and it is the discovery of the Gnostic Gospels in 1945 in Nag Hammadi. I would be lying if I said I understood the full relevance of these. You may understand it more than I do.
No, no, I don't. I would only have bullshit to talk.
Um, when I first read about this, it was I read The Invisibles that led me to Valis, and then after Valis, I was like, oh, I want to learn a little bit more about this. I really feel like I need to dive a little bit deeper into the pool on this, but the essential gist is that these scriptures were found that some people believe were chapters of the Bible that were never published from the Gnostic gospel side of the New Testament. And that there are things within the Gnostic gospel that are both philosophical and sort of like cosmological that directly contradict what we understand as modern Christianity and like all of the values and ethics that go along with that.
Gotcha. And so that's the sort of the whole world has been built on
A lie.
omissions. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that strongly influenced Dick in that, like, I don't know how Christian his background was, but it was essentially saying to him, like, oh, there's this possibility that the entire groundwork for at least
Yeah.
American society is all bullshit.
Yeah.
And he comes into that in Valis with he directly references the those gospels, but then he also gets into it. I keep just saying the mushrooms,
Yeah.
but in the transmigration, that is a version of that,
That's
right?
the thing that reveals it's all been wrongly constructed.
Yeah,
May I tease you gently about two things?
sure.
Okay. First off, uh, never published is a very funny way to say that these texts were, found.
Sorry, that is yeah. Yeah, when I said never published, I mean they were never included in
Yeah.
what we consider the like
Yeah.
comprehensive
They
New
somehow
Testament.
fell away from the text of
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing I want to tease you about, and I want you to respond to,
Yeah.
when you said, I really need to dig into this, it sounded like the beginnings of some version of what you're talking about, of that need to find some answer, to
Yeah.
find some
Yeah.
revelation that changes the world around you or makes it clear that yes, this has all been a lie, and my disarray, my mental disarray or my deterioration is part and parcel with the end of the world.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I do. I find that compelling in the same way that I think Dick found it compelling. Um, but at the same time, I've also never like gone and read the Gnostic Gospels. In
Yeah.
fact, I just downloaded the audiobook to it and it just sat on my phone and I didn't listen to it until it expired.
So it has been
So,
published.
uh, it has, yeah. Yeah, somebody did. It's not collected with the Bible though.
You know what I really hope? I really hope that when you do recheck that out and you start playing it, that it's in like Aramaic or Hebrew.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Um, yeah, subjectively, clearly from what I've told you about my father and my uncle, I come from a family that is both Christian, but also like completely dismissive of any kind of traditional interpretations of it. And so actually, it's funny, I just remembered this. I got my father the Gnostic Gospels one year for Christmas. I don't know if he ever read it. Um,
He
but
didn't
because
need that. He was doing his own thing.
yeah, no, exactly.
I had a moment of regret at making a joke about the language of the Gnostic Gospels because, again, like I said, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I made a guess at a language I don't know what it is, Aramaic, and then or Hebrew. Not correct. Original language of Gnostic Gospels is Greek,
Oh wow. Okay.
and then
Yeah.
translated to Coptic.
So you've literally never heard any of the stuff about this about like the demiurge or any of that?
We've already passed my familiarity with it, even though I'm not like, what the hell are you talking about? We're way past what I know about it.
Wow. Is that just because you just are like allergic to anything theological? Or do you just it's just not past your
I think that
radar?
this is not the kind of thing that hooks me in terms of what might feel like a invigorating revelation
Ah, okay.
because I'm not biblical. Now, find me a new theory as to who killed JFK with some valid evidence, and I'll just be all over it.
We're back to conspiracy theories. Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So Charlie knows this, but I went and saw Dana Gould do stand up over the weekend, and he has like a whole bit about conspiracy theories and how they've been ruined for us as a society over the last couple of years because they used to be fun,
Yeah,
you
his
know?
first bit that I ever heard was about the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, all
All
right,
right.
let's move a little bit further. So there's two key principles of Dick's that are throughout these novels and something that he doesn't really address directly in the text, but I think we should talk about. And the first is the empire never ended, which is
The Roman Empire.
which is a phrase that he comes back to over and over in his works. It's in VALIS. Um, and yeah, it is essentially this idea that he, I'm going to screw this up and there's going to be Philip K. Dick fans screaming for my blood after listening to this, but that he thinks that, yeah, like time actually stopped during the Roman Empire and that it's just been this cyclical, uh, going through the motions of that oppressive society for centuries since then.
Well, this is in the book, certainly Valis and the other two a little bit. The idea that time is um, permeable, that
Yeah.
the truth is not, oh, this is now, this is 1976, but also you can hallucinate, you know,
Hmm.
76. It's that they are happening simultaneously. And he talked about that in a an interview that was explicitly about why he thought that way,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
that he saw the Roman disregard for the poor showing
He,
up in how people understood policy at the time.
yeah, he was struggling very similar to how you and I are struggling right now with what we're seeing happening in our own country. He was struggling to understand what he interpreted as the cruelty of modern politics, and how it fit into his understanding of what our society was all about. And the only way he was able to make sense of it was like time is broken, and for some reason we're still returning to the values of the Romans.
Yeah.
Here's his example. Let's get into the details here. Um, he points out if you look in the Bible, there's this whole segment about how it's important to care for the needy, care for the sick, care for the poor, care for the helpless, care for the disadvantaged. All of that is 3,000 years old and has been worked on for 3,000 years. Quote, and now we're hearing that kids will not get hot lunch programs and the elderly won't get Social Security and everybody will have to get by on their own. We're not seeing the clock turn back to 1912 before the graduated income tax was enacted. We're seeing it turned back to Imperial Rome, where I think it was Seneca who said, there's no use giving food to the starving. It'll just prolong their miserable lives. Let's pause for a second. Charlie and I are recording this on November 10th, 2025. Uh, we have our government here in America has been shut down for over a month now. I believe it was last Monday that SNAP benefits were put on pause, so that people who are poor and can't afford to buy their own food could no longer feed themselves. I went to the grocery store today, Charlie, and there was a Xerox sign up at the cash register. SNAP benefits are no longer accepted. If you are hungry, here's a phone number for a food bank.
Jesus.
Uh, Now, as we're recording this, there's some discussion about, I think it's 8 Democrats who are saying that they're going to leap over the aisle and work together with the Republicans to get the government back up and running.
Well, the
But
cynical part of me says that now that airline travel is going to be disrupted,
yep.
a very different set of voters is going to be inconvenienced.
I say all that to say that Philip K. Dick was upset in 1982 about kids not getting hot lunch and elderly people not getting Social Security. I wonder how he would feel today, seeing what happened over the last week.
People could say this quote that he says: we're now seeing a return to the old imperial system of let the disadvantaged sink to the bottom, let them die. This is so tragic and so inhumane. I think that there are people probably saying that right now.
That's what I'm saying right now. But then this is where he surprises me. He says, However, I can't work up any animosity towards Ronald Reagan. I see him as being caught up in historic trends that are so powerful. He was just literally brought to power the way Hitler was, which was legally and by a very large majority. If only he knew what was coming.
It is true that Reagan was elected legally and by a huge majority. The Hitler thing might have been a little bit out of line.
Right. I agree. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Ronald Reagan, but I don't know that comparing him to Hitler is, although it must have seemed like that at the time, you
Yeah.
know?
So these books are written from a place for Philip K. Dick of trying to beat back what he felt was happening at the time. And not the Reagan Revolution right away, because this stuff was happening in the early 70s
Yeah.
that was informing these books. But at the time that he was finishing this trilogy, he was saying, we are in a time when there is a cruel spirit across the land, and it seems to be gathering momentum. I have some very close personal friends who are showing symptoms of great cruelty and interest only in their individual welfare. These are people who at one time had been in the anti war movement, very idealistic, and are now exhibiting a complete narcissism, a me first type of thing. Okay, now when I read that, I
You,
lost my goddamn mind.
and you said, okay, boomer.
I did not say that. I said, wait, what year was this from?
Uh-huh. No, there's a reason why I bolded and underlined this. I think that is a very profound statement on his behalf, and it really struck me as being indicative of the exact same thing we're going through today. Although, having lived through both of these, even though I was, 3 years old when he said this the first time around, it feels worse this time, doesn't it?
A little bit. Okay, let us move into the final indignity that you must suffer, which is discussing academic literature that brings out themes in some books that you really like.
Yeah, and I want to cue this up too because I don't want to assume that any super context listener has listened to all of our episodes in chronological order. But in our last episode, Charlie pointed out, rightfully so, that he thinks that my secondary mission on this iteration of super context is to purposefully pull obtuse academic articles so that I can rip on the academia
Yeah,
project.
you're doing what I do when I pull
However,
bad reviews of books that I like.
However, you pulled this, and I'm
I
going through the notes,
I might have been baiting you a
and
little
I
bit.
opened this up, and I was like, "What the fuck?" So this is written by Lawrence A. Rickles, called Endopsychic Allegories, and my 10,000 foot view of this article is that I believe it's an academic paper, although in no place I could find what publication it occurred within. It's in all kinds of databases, so it must be in some legitimate publication. But it is applying the theories of Freud, Walter Benjamin, and Daniel Paul Schreiber to the VALIS trilogy. um, I found it completely incomprehensible, and I've read Derrida and at least been able to have a somewhat cogent conversation about it. This was unreadable. Um, but let's try anyways. I pulled a few sections that I think will help us sort of understand what he's going for here. Um, he says the VALIS trilogy's cross-sectioning of the sci-fi condition as illustration and inspiration, the essay revisits as a endopsychic allegory the stations of Freud's and Benjamin's crossing with or through Schreiber. I don't know what that means. And I think that might be the one sentence that directly addresses the VALIS trilogy. Do you know what it means?
No, uh, I am delighted by this kind of postmodern studies style psychotherapists digging into these trilogies, this trilogy, excuse me, because what he's really doing is he's asking us to read the Valis trilogy through the work of Freud, Walter Benjamin, and this person Schreiber, who I do not know
Yeah,
what their
me
deal
either.
is, but it speaks to what these books are, which is rhizomatic renditions of someone's psychological state in their 50s.
I mean, I don't know anything about the author of this piece, but here's another paragraph. Uh, it proves possible to fold Philip K. Dick's trilogy Valis inside a relay of texts by Schreiber, Freud, and Benjamin, which together promote a process of secularization in the details and among the effects of haunting, while at the same time addressing and maintaining in the big picture the religious frames of reference, but as abandoned ruins, lexicons still deposited in our range of reference, but deposits without redemption value. Am I incorrect in that the way that these sentences are framed are absolutely grammatically nonsensical? Like that it's not even the theories that this person's referencing, but the way the sentence is shaped doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think you're being a little too harsh.
Okay, I mean it could just be
let me
me, but
let me see. So it proves possible to do this thing with these things that together can promote this thing, and you can at the same time do these two things in the larger context of religious frames of reference, but also as abandoned ruins. Like, okay, nope, you're right. That's crazy.
okay.
Here is a bit that I think is actually useful. The trilogy concludes with unmourning or melancholia, not so much as one of the psychoses, but more importantly as the portal to and foundation of all the psychotic variations on its basic theme, that of the reality of loss. So
Yeah,
this is
I
where we
think we can agree
finally,
on
yeah,
that.
here's where we finally lock into something. So a psychotherapist who wants to talk about a psychoanalyst's work, a cultural historian's work. I don't know if that's what Benjamin is, but we'll call it that. And then Schreiber, who I looked up, is a German judge who was a famous person who was afflicted with schizophrenia and could discuss it in such a way that his writings survived.
Oh,
And
okay.
this is from the era of, well, he was born in 1842 and died in 1911.
So having that context, I think, would have helped to understand why is important to this particular case
Well, you
study.
probably should have read the whole article, man.
I did.
This is back to like one of the things that's going on here is in the books is a reckoning with the fact that people die and people are lost, and sometimes it's on purpose by themselves, and sometimes it's due to the world being cruel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those are so not science fiction in my mind. You know what I mean?
I do. And I think, something that maybe, we're circling around on like a key point to understand both these books and maybe Philip K. Dick is that, you know how Jeff Vandermeer talks about how every author has a scar and that
Yeah.
informs all of their work? I think Philip K. Dick's scar was the loss of his twin sister, starts there, right? And I think like he goes
Something
through
he probably
this
had to learn about being a child.
third hand, yeah. Um, but then I think he goes through life like experiencing one cruelty after another and not understanding why. I think and these cruelties are both just the nature of the world and actually acted upon him by other people. And yeah, I think like a key part of his work is grappling with like why does the world produce so much pain?
Yeah. And is anyone doing something about it?
Yeah, yeah. To which the answer was no. Not only are they not doing anything about it, but they're actively enabling it.
Okay. Last thing. Bogdan Trocha's The Psychedelic Reinterpretation of Corpus Christi by Philip K. Dick.
So this one I read through as well, and I want to say this was easier to understand. I don't have a bone to pick with it. However, I believe that this writer is Polish, and I believe that the text that we were referencing is translated from Polish, so there's a little bit of that like grammatical
Yeah.
confusion
Yeah.
here.
I do like how it helps us place the novels in a period of time, and then also kind of expands the backdrop.
Hmm.
Transmigrations, like the whole VALIS, were created in quite specific circumstances of the 1960s. So there's some of that weird translation. When the texts from Qumran were published, it led to the appearance of the first speculations about the relationship between their content and the Bible, but also about the Gnostic thought contained in the apocryphal writings of the Qumran and Nag Hammadi collection. So this is what the author wants to compare. He wants to compare the three texts that Philip K. Dick wrote with the explosion, as you said, of biblical scholarship coming from recovered texts,
Yeah, I mean,
apocrypha, excuse me.
I don't think Philip K. Dick was the only one who was fascinated by the Gnostic Gospels, right? Like, I think we don't know this because we weren't alive yet, but I think that there was part of the counterculture sort of, again, like let's use the Dick's terminology, the turned on scene in San Francisco and the Bay Area was fascinated with the idea that there may be actual, like tangible evidence that the Bible was a lie, you know? And then the next thing that the author of this piece references is how popular Carlos Castaneda's books were.
Yeah, who was a pharmacological adventurer.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got this sort of double whammy, right? The like, okay, let's expand the mind through psychoactive substances and combine that with a distrust of everything that our society is founded upon.
That our Western capitalist society is founded upon.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
folks were reaching out to, um, South American indigenous culture. They were going back to Zen and Eastern philosophies.
Yeah.
And, what was it? The Bishop Pike stood on trial for heresy, which sounds like something from the 1300s to me.
Okay. I don't 100% know this for sure, but I'm just basing it off of the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. I think the trial was within the Episcopal Church. I don't think it was a
Yeah, totally,
legal
totally.
trial.
I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting like, oh my God, did they burn him at the stake? But just
Yeah.
the idea that in very recent history there was a trial for heresy because a guy wanted a rock and roll band, and I know it's not the only reason, but a guy wanted a rock and roll band to play in his church,
Hmm.
and he was thinking about searching the desert for some extra stuff, be it
Yeah.
psychedelic or simply the living presence of God.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
it feels to me like if we if we read this article and we take some of the connections that Trocha is making, you can make a case for the VALIS trilogy being an attempt to go from paranoid and psychedelic down to material and immediate in a way like taking Philip K. Dick's interests and obsessions and almost making a case for them being not just science fiction plot points, not just science fiction themes, but instead, as they land in the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, they are real things that we are all dealing with and that people are searching for in that moment in time.
Yeah. Could you unpack that a little bit more? Like, what do you think the needs are that those people, whether it's Dick or his readers, were specifically searching for?
Well, talking about in the 60s of, Carlos Castaneda being very popular and talking about uh, mysticism and drug use that would expand the mind and sort of take you out of Western culture and plant you firmly back in a longer tradition of, is it Yaqui Indian culture?
I don't know how to pronounce it, but
I don't
let's
know how to
go with
say it
that.
either.
Yeah. Maybe Yaki.
And then Alan Watts being a Zen guru. I'm
Yeah.
sure that that's not actually what he was, but a person who was bringing what Trocha called the rediscovered spirituality of the Far East, people were dealing with that, or not dealing with that. People were trying to find some answers in that, and those answers were very like um, not annihilating, but they disputed the principles of the modern culture right then.
Yeah.
They were disputing the idea that, let me tell you one word. Are you ready? Plastics. Like that kind of movement in American culture
Hmm.
was being fought against. And so what Dick was doing, not on purpose, I don't think, but what Dick was doing could be understood as a kind of argument that what he was exploring in his work in a psychedelic way, in a science fictiony way, in a spectacular way, was actually the same kind of struggles that people were having in a very immediate material and unscience fictiony way at that moment in time.
Okay. I think I understand where you're going with this, and I'm going to try to transition toward an ending here for us. Um, because what you're saying makes me think about where we're at in our present situation. And when I'm feeling generous and compassionate and not angry about everything that's happening right now, I try to remind myself that the reason why um, so many people voted for what's happening and so many people stand by and let it continue to happen is because the way that our society is currently set up is not meeting most people's needs, their basic
Yeah.
needs. And they don't understand why. And that's the problem is that they're lashing out at what they think is the cause of their needs being unmet. And sometimes those needs are as basic as not making enough money to put food on the table. Or maybe the industry within which you work is threatened to no longer be relevant, and therefore you're going to be out of work. Or maybe it's as simple as like we hear all this talk about incels. Maybe it's as simple as that like you don't know how to meet another person and be in a loving relationship with them, but you're yearning for that, right? So there's these like basic human needs that are going unmet, but folks don't know how to articulate where it's happening. Um, and that sort of brings me all the way around. Like, I think that's also what Dick was kind of talking about. He wasn't talking about those same specific needs. And back then, they didn't have QAnon and 4chan and whatever
Yeah, but they
other
had the John
nonsense.
Birch Society and people who were going to vote for Goldwater.
Yeah, but I think that that was grounded in a form of rationality. It was maybe fake rationality, but it pretended to be rational. Whereas, like, this stuff today just feels like absolute like Wild West. I guess like where I'm going with all of this is I'm trying to come back to the this question of what is eventually going to be us. And I've already admitted that like I'm beginning to feel the pull upon my own brain, which is like as white men get older, we seem to want to be able to explain how everything works so we can make sense of why it's not working for us.
But even more so, trying to explain how our disadvantages work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
those disadvantages have to be understood as sometimes as supernatural, if what they mostly are psychological stuff that you're not supposed to be susceptible to as a white male American. Don't cry, suck it up, be a man,
Hmm.
you got this. You know, work out, take your protein powder, and be ready to handle whatever. Whereas these books point out, like, look, grief will destroy you. You know, your
Yeah.
mind will turn on you. There is something outside of us that can be healing or can be damaging, and you have to reconcile with it. You can't just blunder on or deny it or hide it. You've got to engage with it. You got to put on your slippers, and cross the threshold, whatever that means to you as a metaphor.
I'm going back and looking at our note from the top of the episode, which I think was 17 hours ago, um, where we talked about all the things that happened to Philip K. Dick in the 70s and that they seem to be a catalyst for the writing of these books, right? And I look at those things and I think, based on what little you and I know about Philip K. Dick over the research of this episode and the books of his that we've read, I don't think when he got divorced, he knew how to articulate what was wrong with his relationships, right? And what he was bringing to them. We saw that earlier when the way he referred to his divorces. He also didn't seem to be able to understand objectively his addictions and substance abuse, or have the terminology or language to understand what he was struggling with in terms of mental illness and why, right? Like, there's no point in any of these texts, as far as I've seen so far, where he's like, well, it all goes back to my twin sister dying 6 weeks after we were born, right? Um, it feels like, at least in his case study, right? Like, we're able to look back at this and the answers are pretty obvious to us, but they were not obvious to him at the time in the moment. And part of that was his own blind spots, and part of that was society.
And so these books are us watching him start to figure that out.
I think so, yeah. And I think he was getting there. I think that the character of Angel in Transmigration, notable for being the first female character out of, like, what, he had like 50 novels or something like that. Like, she seems to be wise in a way none of the other characters around her are. And they're all searching for meaning, and she's just like, I'm cool just like smoking weed every night and listening to Beethoven records and working in a record shop. And I don't need to be dragged into all of this drama. You've been listening to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How it's made and how it informs our everyday culture.
Our theme music is Human Factor by Mile Marker.
And you're listening to Drive Fast by 3 Chainlinks.
All show notes are available at patreon.com/supercontext.
And you can email the show at supercontextpodcast@gmail.com.
I'm available on Blue Sky as @ChristianSager.
And I am not available. I have a scorched earth policy on social media. 2 N's, 2 T's.